Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Unexplained Diaries. Here on this channel, I share real life encounters with beings from beyond the skies to help you unwind and drift off to sleep. Before we dive in, I would love to hear from you. Leave a comment and let me know where you're tuning in from. Now, find a comfortable spot, relax, and let's begin. I was driving home on Highway 14 around 1 in the morning when I saw them. I remember the time because my dashboard clock blinked 1:03 as I passed the county line sign, and I told myself I'd sleep when I got home. I was tired in that bone-deep way that comes after a 12-hour shift, hands sore, the back of my neck tight, but awake enough to keep my speed steady and my eyes focused. The road out there is the kind that goes on forever. Flat, straight, lined with corn and the occasional farmhouse a long way off. No streetlights, no turns, just an honest ribbon of asphalt and the stars above. Earlier that night, the ride had been ordinary enough. I'd tuned the radio to a late-night talk show and kept the volume low, windows cracked a bit for the cold. The first small, weird thing happened maybe 20 minutes out. The radio cut to static for a beat, then came back with the host mid-sentence, as if the station had erased a chunk of an interview and stitched it back together. I shrugged it off. Stations go clunky out in the boonies. Then my headlights caught a shape by the roadside. A mailbox tilted strange, new plywood nailed over an old sign. I thought about stopping to check, the kind of practical caution that's part of being out late. But when I slowed, the shape was gone, and there was nothing to hit. Just a strip of grass blown flat like something had dragged by. I made a note to tell the neighbor in the morning and kept driving. A few miles later, I passed a farm I'd passed 100 times. The windmill that usually creaked by the corn was dead still. There was no hum, no chitter of night insects, nothing in the fields except a faint smell of ozone that set the back of my throat on edge. I don't usually notice smells on a drive, but that night it sat there like someone had rubbed the road with metal. All of that was small, little misfires that make you look up and tell yourself a sensible story. The big thing was the pair of headlights. They were far ahead, just pinpricks at first. Those two white arcs you get when there's someone coming on the other side of a long straight. At the distance they were, I figured I'd be passing them in 5 or 10 minutes. I checked my speed, nudged it down a hair because the thought of a tailgater at night makes me twitchy, and let the truck roll. The oddness was that the headlights didn't behave like oncoming lights. They were in the right place, on the opposite lane, but they weren't getting closer. They were moving, smoothly, the way a car moves on a highway, except they were moving backward. Not flickering, not swerving, not the erratic motion of someone in reverse. They were gliding down the lane away from me, remaining the same angular size in the distance. The beams still pointed at me, as if the car were driving away while somehow facing me. I blinked and thought maybe I'd misread it. Maybe the car had turned around a farm entrance and was heading the other way, or maybe I was dreaming from too many hours on my feet. But the headlights kept retreating down the asphalt, their beams staying bright and steady. They kept the same speed as any normal highway driver, smooth and even. For a full minute, I watched them glide backward, and I felt the kind of slow, creeping unease that starts not in the head, but in the middle of your chest. At the edge of my vision, the radio cut. Not a hiccup, it went to dead silence and then static, then nothing. My phone vibrated against the console, but the screen was black when I reached for it. It lit only after I touched it, showing a missed text from my sister. "You okay?" I must have left the sound on that set of talk show reruns earlier. She texted after her shift, asking when I'd be home. I typed back, "soon," and felt ridiculous for being out here, talking in the dark to a woman who'd probably be asleep by now. I kept my eyes on the retreating lights. I passed mile marker 42. The lights passed mile marker 46. The numbers were moving wrong in my head. I tried to do the math. If they were traveling at 60 and going away from me, how could I be catching them at all? Logic seemed thin in that strip of night. I thought about pulling over, about flipping the truck into park and calling the non-emergency line, but I didn't. Something about stepping out of the truck into that flat field space felt harder to do than it should have. As I drove, the lights kept their distance, a perfect mirror of normal highway motion, but inverted, retreating like a tape rewound at the same speed it had originally played. When I finally reached the place where I should have passed them, the hill with the old oak on the right, they'd slipped through that point and were already a shallow arc ahead of me, headlights still facing back, still the same brightness. The oak cast no shadow. The light didn't throw a beam into the trees. It was like the beams were painted onto the road with a steady hand. Once, just to break the spell, I hit my high beams for a second. My lights punched forward in the usual way, and the distant pair dimmed slightly, as if annoyed, like someone turning away. That made me laugh, nervously. I'm the kind of person who jokes when he's scared. I also realized then that there was no silhouette behind those lights. No shape of a hood, no reflection, nothing. Just 2 points of white in the dark that behaved like car lights, and yet they seemed free of a car's anatomy. At some point, a semi came toward me, low and slow. I remember the moment their orange reflector lights passed, and the driver glanced at me with that automatic nod you give another late-night driver. He didn't see what I was watching, the retreating headlights, or if he did, he didn't change a thing. After the rig passed, the pair of lights were still there, still moving backward like they had business elsewhere. I tried to hold my attention like a weight. I told myself I was being ridiculous, that headlights can be reflections, that sometimes you see an afterimage in the dark. I even mouthed out loud, "Okay," explanation, and listed them in my head. Mirage, hunter's lantern, trick of optics. But none of them matched the motion. Smooth, consistent, controlled backward motion at highway speed. Headlamps still aimed at me. Then, without fanfare, they blinked out. Not a flare, not a fade. 1 second, the road held 2 distant pins of white. The next second, they were gone, like someone had erased them with a single swipe. The beam that had felt so insistently present left nothing on the asphalt. No reflection in the puddles from the rain earlier, no glint off a metal sign, just black road under a black sky. My stomach dropped in the way it does when you're sure you've missed something crucial. I kept driving because the world doesn't wait for you to make sense of it. My hands were palms sweaty on the wheel. I passed mile marker 50 and the clock read 1:27, even though I'd been watching the far lights for a longer stretch. The truck's odometer ticked like always. The engine ran smooth. The radio came back, then cut again to a little bit of static and a jazz tune I didn't recognize. I wanted to believe that whatever I'd seen had a tidy explanation, something prosaic I could tell my sister over coffee. I saw some headlights acting weird, must have been a reflection. But my chest remembered pressure, like something had leaned on it and left a little bruise. I stopped at the first open store I hit, an all-night gas and deli, where the clerk squinted at me when I bought a soda and asked if I'd driven far. I said yes, and he said, "You look like you saw something." He didn't press it, and I didn't offer details. There wasn't anything to offer that sounded normal, and the clerk was already back to sweeping the counter. I sat in my truck with the heater on and the morphine of fluorescent lights seeping through the cab. The screen of my phone showed a half-dozen missed calls from a client I'd promised to call back. I tapped a reply and told him I'd be there tomorrow. Small things to stitch the world back together. The drive from the store to my apartment felt longer than the drive out. My attention kept snapping to the horizon, like a kid checking for fireworks that would never light. I tried to test myself, blink fast and see if the road had moved, look away and count to 5, anything to force normal continuity. The world was patient, ordinary. The cornfields breathed in the same rhythm, the distant farmhouse porch lights blinked the same way, my neighbor's dog barked at a cat as usual. I told myself the next day I'd drive out that way again at dusk when I could see every detail, maybe find a skid mark or a reflective tarp, some physical trace. In daylight, the road was mundane. Ruts from tractors, a stray mattress dumped in a ditch, the same tired mailbox with its flag hanging. Nothing to explain the retreating lights. Weeks passed. I told a few friends, half laughed it off, offered theories involving drones and military exercises and experimental drivers with a death wish. One friend who's a mechanic said, "Maybe a rig with reversible headlights," and I wanted to laugh because the idea felt too clever by half. Mostly I didn't talk about it. It felt personal, like something private had glanced off me in the night and gone on. Sometimes when I'm driving home now, I'll see a pair of lights way off and my stomach go tight. I slow down slightly, not because I'm afraid to pass them, but because I want to be the kind of person who notices small things and keeps his hands steady. I still sleep in my bed, go to work, laugh with people at the diner. The highway is a road, the lights are lights. But there is a small, stubborn memory that sits behind my ribs like a pebble, that two headlamps can move away from you like a person stepping back, that they can keep their gaze fixed as they go, and that when they decide to vanish, they can make the world look exactly the same as it always did, except for what you know you saw. We parked at the far end of the quarry lot because it was the only place the town lights didn't reach, and because Liam swore the Perseids were supposed to be good that night. It was the kind of clear August night where the air smelled like cut grass and the sky looked obscene. So many stars you could almost feel them if you leaned out the window. We'd both been up late, me grading papers, him on a double shift at the brewery, so the silence of the place felt like a relief. The quarry pond lay black and flat below us, and the half moon glowed thin over the ridge. We sat with the truck idling, music off, windows down. Liam had a thermos of coffee. I had my phone on the dash with the camera app open like an idiot, ready to catch anything dramatic. At first, there were the usual things: a stray meteor every few minutes, a plane now and again. Then something small and bright caught my eye just above the tree line to the west. It looked like a star at first, a single point of white light, but very, very steady, not twinkling, not moving. I nudged the gear shift with my knee and said, "You see that?" Liam turned and squinted. I could see the light reflected in his pupils. "Yeah," he said. "Weird. Way too steady for a star." We watched it for maybe 30 seconds, and then it darted. Not a slow change in position like a plane or satellite, but a quick little hop to the right, then another, then a quick zig left. Not a blur. It stopped and held, perfect and bright, like someone had placed a thumbtack in the sky and moved it with a finger. It kept doing that, small jerky motions, like it was scanning or picking spots. Whatever it was moving impossibly fast for something at star distance. Liam laughed under his breath, partly because of the absurdity, and partly because we were both trying to make a joke to quiet the little nervousness I could feel under my ribs. He grabbed my phone, because his hands were steadier for filming, and aimed. The white point darted again, small and precise, and I felt this stupid, huge urge to record something that would prove we hadn't hallucinated it. His phone screen went black the moment he hit record. I thought he'd locked it or the battery had died, but the phone light in his hand was on. He tapped it. Nothing. "Weird," he said, and tried again. Same thing. I grabbed my phone and held it up, and the moment my camera app opened, my screen pixelated and went dark, like someone pulled a blackout curtain across the glass. Not just a glitch in the app, my whole screen looked dead white, then black. The phone still made the little shutter sound when I tapped, but I saw nothing. The phone still vibrated when texts came in. It was like the viewfinder itself had been muted. While we fiddled, the light kept darting, always keeping the same distance out over the ridge, sometimes stuttering down toward the tree line and then jerking back up. Every now and then, it would hang in a spot long enough that it looked almost like a new star had been born and then moved on. At one point, it darted to within the silhouette of the old radio tower a mile off and then zipped back out. The whole time, the quarry pond lay flat and black, reflecting nothing. We tried all sorts of things. Restarted phones, switched to video, to slow motion, to the camera's manual mode. Each time the screen would either go black or show only static. Liam's flashlight, when he clicked it on, looked normal, a white cone into the trees, but the camera would show nothing. We weren't alone in the lot. A couple of people walked their dogs farther up, and I yelled over to them to see if they spotted the flash. They stopped and looked and waved like, "Nice sky," then kept walking. No one else seemed to notice the jittery star the way we did, or if they did, they didn't react. At some point, the radio on the truck started to burble with static of its own. I hit the power and the static stopped. A car passed on the road below, and its taillights made a slow creeper of orange as it drove past. For a minute, my compass app spun a half degree like it had bumped. It calmed. None of the screens were showing the object, but our eyes were seeing it clearly. Bright, fast-moving, angular, even in its motion. Then it did something that made my throat dry. The light shot down in a perfect diagonal and paused right above the highest birch on the ridge, then did this shallow, precise back and forth motion like a pendulum. We were close enough, probably, that if we'd had binoculars, we could have made out a shape. I lifted my phone again, thumb trembling, but the screen stayed black. Liam swore and set the phone down on the dash as if it were fragile. I told him I was going to get closer. I know people who would tell you that's reckless. Maybe it was. I grabbed a flashlight and pocketed my phone, and we walked along the gravel edge toward the road that leads up the ridge. The light followed the crests of the trees as we moved. It didn't track us personally, but it never got further away. If anything, it matched our speed across the skyline. When we sprinted for a stretch, it matched that sprint, still darting in quick, unnatural hops. It was precise in a way that made me think of a machine, but there was no sound. No motors, no slosh of air. That lack of sound was the strangest thing. Up in the grasses, a fox yapped and a dog barked briefly, and the night noise filled in like an ordinary soundtrack. But right where that point of light hovered, the world felt thinner. Wind in the tops of the pines quieted, insects dropped away. It was as if the light's presence made the night itself stop fussing. We stopped at the start of the old service road and huffed in the dark. The phone's displays were blank whenever we pointed them at the sky. The screens worked, texts, maps, everything, but not when aimed at that point. I fumbled my phone, clicked the voice recorder because I wanted audio evidence at least. The recorder caught us breathing and Liam whispering, and then this second of nothing, like someone had lifted the sound away, and then the recorder picked us up again with our words muffled. I listened to it back later, and there's this tiny gap, a sharp quiet, where the sound drops to an almost inaudible hush. It didn't make sense. The light finally did something different. It darted once, and then instead of the quick hops it had been making, it pinned itself in the air and elongated, just for a heartbeat, into a slim, bright streak. For the one imperfect second, it looked like a form. Not a star, not a plane, but this metallic glint, a reflective edge angled at the sky. It was like seeing the glint off a hood ornament, what's only in the sky. I swear on everything that when my phone had blacked out earlier, it saved something somewhere. Liam's camera app, once it woke up again, showed a thumbnail. One frame of footage, a single frozen moment with a silvery, angular flash mid-sky, and then black. We didn't see the thing after that. It snapped upwards so fast my stomach did that flip you get on a roller coaster, and then there was nothing but stars in their regular places, as if someone had wiped a screen and started the normal program again. Our phones lit up normally. The voice memo picked up again. There was just the scratch of us breathing and our shoes on gravel. The whole episode had the quality of someone rearranging a small private room of the world and then closing the door. We sat on the tailgate for a long time, replaying what happened, trying to find the angle that made it ordinary. Maybe a satellite cluster, a drone with mirrored surface, a trick of human eyes after a long week, caffeine and exhaustion playing with perception. The one-frame image on Liam's phone was the kind of proof that's maddening. Too little, too crisp, and impossible to verify in isolation. We both took pictures of that single frame and texted them to friends. One of them joked to come back with night vision gear. Another wrote back a string of question marks. We drove home slow, both of us glued to the patches of sky between the treetops. The clock in my dashboard had jumped ahead 3 minutes at some point. Liam said his watch had stopped for a second and then come back on. I don't remember if we took the Ridgeline Road or the highway. That's a blur when I try to rewind it now. At 2:03 in the morning, I pulled into my driveway and sat there with the engine off for a long time, the single frozen frame on my screen like a fragment of a dream I could almost hold. The next day, we uploaded the one frame to my laptop to blow it up. It shows a bright metallic shard mid-sky with a little starlight halo around it, then a ragged black cut where the file ends. The file metadata is clean, timestamp, format, file size. Nothing corrupted except the missing minutes before and after. I ran it past a buddy who fiddles with cameras. He said maybe a sensor spike, lens flare, something technical. He could say the words that would make it smaller. He didn't say them with conviction. We haven't gone back to the quarry. Not because we think something dangerous is out there, more because that particular kind of strangeness sticks to a place. When I drive past the ridge now, I keep the radio on, a little louder than I used to. At night, I check that my phone's camera works if I point it anywhere mundane. The single frame sits in a folder somewhere on my hard drive. I pull it up sometimes and stare at the glint and try to remember what it felt like to have the world go quiet for a second, to see that impossible, reflecting sliver where the stars should be. I don't know what it was. I don't have a neat explanation, and I don't have a better image than that single frame. All I have is us, two people under a big sky, watching a bright thing that moved like it shouldn't have and then vanished, and a blank bit of footage that suggests the night kept more of itself than we were allowed to see. I was tired in that way you get after a long haul and 3 hours of waiting at a shipyard, the sort of tired that makes every radio crackle sound loud. My name's Tom Rains, and I drive a reefer out of St. Louis. That night I was heading south on I-55, empty but with a promised load in Memphis in the morning. It had been raining off and on all evening. The highway was shiny and the wipers had a steady, dull rhythm. I had the CB on like always, Channel 19, a half-sleep habit more than anything, because the mic sitting by my knee feels oddly like company when the miles stretch. Little things started off normal and then not. Around 2 in the morning, my GPS blinked and told me to reroute for no reason. The blue line stuttered and came back to where I was. The radio cut to static half a second before a word from the talk show host, and then came back like someone had put a tin cup to the speaker and tapped. I muttered at it and flicked the knob, told myself it was old wiring in the cab. That's what I do. Find the mundane. You have to when you're on the road all the time. Further down, I passed the stretch of highway with the old overpass, where the reflectors have a way of catching your light and making it look like a string of eyes. That night, a few of the reflectors were missing. A farmer would probably notice, but the road was wide and empty, so I didn't think much of it. Twice I saw a flash of something off to the right, no shape, just a low silver glint over the tree line, and then it was gone. Once my dash clock flickered forward 2 minutes and then righted itself like nothing had changed. Little misalignments, nothing you write home about. The CB started acting up more noticeably about 30 miles out. The background hiss would thicken and then clear, like a throat clearing, and once there was a faint voice that came through under the static, a syllable maybe, too far away to make out. I keyed the mic and called in a 10-4, as if the world outside the cab was just another trucker. The radio answered me with an empty hiss. My hand felt stupid, holding the mic like that. I put it down. There were cars, not many, and one semi that passed me with that big, slow whoosh that seems to come from somewhere deep in their diesel heart. The driver nodded, which is code for, "You okay?" And I nodded back, because you nod at people on the road even when you don't know what else to do. After he went past, I caught a flash of green ahead, an exit sign, the usual kind, far in the distance. I was half glad because it meant the highway would take a slight curve and there would be somewhere to ease off the throttle if I needed to. As I got closer, the sign looked wrong. From a mile out, it was the normal rectangular green, the kind that tells you mile numbers and exits. But it sat 20 feet above the shoulder, not on a pole where you expect it, but suspended over the road like someone hung it from nothing. I blinked slow and thought maybe the rain was playing tricks with the light. My windshield had a faint film on it, and long trips do weird things to a tired brain. The sign didn't wobble in the wind because there wasn't much wind. It didn't have any visible support. No pole, no tower, no cables visible from my angle. I kept the truck steady and watched it. The letters on the sign were clear: Exit 41, Memphis 56, everything that should have been sensible. There were reflectors across the face of it that made the wet night catch in little dots. For a moment, I thought of one of those highway maintenance rigs, a sign rig swinging out from a truck to warn traffic. But there was no truck, no crew, nothing in the shoulder. Just that green rectangle up among the wet mists, like a billboard somebody had levitated. I took the exit anyway because I wanted to get a closer look and because I drive by sight, not by superstition. And an exit is an exit even if it's floated off the ground. As I swung into the deceleration lane, the sign still hung there, exactly the same distance above the pavement. A sedan came up behind me and slowed, then passed on the left without a blink. No one else put on hazards or even slowed. That's the strange thing about odd moments on the road. Everyone else goes on like the world is tight and predictable. When I got under it, I had the weird small hope that there'd be a pole or a beam I'd missed from this angle. There was nothing, just the slick dark sky and the sign's face glowing green as if it were lit from within. The cab felt smaller in that space, like the sign put me in a box. For the half second I passed underneath, the CB went to static, thicker and deeper than the earlier hiss, and then it died. Not a little interference, but nothing. The display went black. The knobs still clicked when I spun them, but the radio made no sound, no hiss, no carrier, nothing. I slapped the mic and keyed it, and it was like someone had cut the line. I kept driving because you do. You breathe in and keep going when the wheels are moving under you. But the silence of the radio sat like a weight. I pulled off at the first truck stop I hit because rules and habits say, check your gear. A dog lay on the pavement near the diesel pumps and lifted its head and then put it back down. Inside, a few drivers drank coffee and traded stories that warmed the place. I opened the radio compartment, checked fuses, pulled the power lead loose and plugged it back in, the basic checks everyone does. The little green light on the unit came on when I flicked the switch, the squawk for power came, but the speakers stayed mute. Not even static. "Bout out?" asked an older fellow at the counter, a man with a cap that said 20 years on I-55. He'd been watching me fuss. I told him the short version and he shrugged. "Sometimes they go on the blink. Lightning will do it, or a short, or nobody." "You try Channel 9? He pointed. I flipped and the silence stayed. I hit 19 like habit and there was nothing but an empty green light under the knobby mic. I asked a mechanic to check the wiring while I grabbed a coffee. He came out, lifted the hood of the unit, peeked at the connectors and said everything looked fine. "You got power," he said, "but no carrier in. Might be a tower issue. Might be until morning." He scratched his chin and added, "You got phone?" I did. It worked. I called dispatch and the voice on the other end said they'd heard nothing of an outage, that towers usually put out notices. He told me to log it and not to sweat it too much. It felt like being told to ignore the hole in the wall. After an hour or so, the rain let up and the world around the truck felt sharper. The big aroma of diesel and warm coffee thick in the air. My hands stopped twitching on the wheel. The sign had been the oddest thing, but not the only one. Earlier, the GPS had blipped. Earlier, my dash clock had jumped. Earlier, the radio crackled like a throat. I told myself stories: induction from a transponder, a maintenance rig angled off camera, some weird strip of fiber optics over the road. All sensible. I signed the log and climbed back in. I drove on. The cab hummed like always. The CB stayed quiet for the rest of the night. I sat on channel 19 and keyed in a breaker every now and again, more to feel the click in my hand than to expect an answer. Sometimes an old habit is all you have to anchor on. When I rolled into Memphis at dawn, the sky was a clean sheet and the rest of the world looked as if nothing out of the ordinary had ever been suspended over a highway. I pulled up at the dock, checked my paperwork, and made a note in the log about the radio outage and the strange sign. The dispatcher put it in the system and told me they'd check with traffic control. They asked if I wanted to file a more formal report. I said yes, because I didn't want to keep the weirdness in my head alone. Later that afternoon, curious, I drove the same exit in daylight. Where the sign had been there was nothing but open air and a smear of damp on the asphalt where rain had run. No pole, no concrete footing, nothing at all. There were no tire marks, no footprints, no maintenance cones, just the shoulder and the ditch and the little ribbon of grass and the place where a green rectangle had floated the night before like a lantern. I drove home the next night with the CB on and it worked fine. People traded jokes on Channel 19 about traffic and pies and how the moon made the road look fat. I felt better because sound fills in the dark and makes it ordinary again. But the memory of that green face hung up in the back of my skull. a thing that didn't fit into the catalog of things that happen on the road. I couldn't explain it and didn't try to. What I could do was put it in the log, tell a few drivers at the diner, and keep going. I still use the CB because it's what we do, but every now and then when I'm eastbound and the night is slick and the signs glow bright, I glance up a little longer than I used to. The highway is a long place with angles you learn, and sometimes the world hands you a small impossible thing and then lets you drive past it. I was staying at my cousin Aaron's place in Rockport, Massachusetts for a few days last September. He and his wife had just moved into this small two-story house a few blocks from the beach, kind of up on a hill where you could see the water if you leaned out the upstairs window. It was supposed to be a relaxing weekend. Grill some food, have a few beers, maybe take the kayaks out if the weather held up. The night it happened, the three of us had been down by the water earlier, just watching the tide come in. It was warm and windy, one of those late summer nights that feels like it's holding on to the last bit of heat before fall starts. By about 10:30, Aaron's wife had gone to bed, and he and I were still out on the back deck with a couple drinks, just talking about work and random stuff. The wind had picked up, and the ocean sounded louder than usual, kind of like static. At some point, Aaron said he was going to turn in too. I wasn't tired yet, so I stayed out there for a while. The deck looked straight out toward the Atlantic, maybe half a mile of dark, open water between the house and the horizon. There weren't any boats out that I could see, just a faint line of distant lights from some trawlers farther down the coast. It was around midnight when I noticed the lights. At first, I thought they were plane lights, 3 of them, evenly spaced, low on the horizon. But they weren't blinking like normal navigation lights do. They were steady, bright white, maybe a little bluish, and too low to be aircraft. They were moving together, slow and deliberate, almost like something being towed, except there wasn't any sound or outline around them. I watched them for a few minutes, trying to figure out what I was seeing. The lights glided west to east, parallel to the shoreline. Then they slowed, like they'd come to a stop, and after a few seconds, more appeared. 3 became 5, then 7, until there were maybe 9 or 10 of them, forming a perfect horizontal line. All the same size, all the same color, all evenly spaced. I remember thinking how precise it looked. Too precise. I went inside and grabbed my phone, thinking I'd try to record it, but when I came back out, the lights hadn't moved. They were just sitting there over the ocean, completely still. I started filming anyway, but when I looked through the screen, they barely showed up. Just faint dots, nothing like how bright they looked in person. After another minute or so, one of the lights blinked out, then another. Not like they dimmed. They just snapped off one by one, moving from left to right. No sound, no flash, no reflection on the water. When the last one disappeared, the horizon went completely black. I stood there waiting for them to come back, thinking maybe it was a trick of the eyes, hat or distant boat lights, or even drones. But the ocean stayed dark. There wasn't anything moving out there. I must have stayed on that deck another 20 minutes before I finally went inside. Aaron was asleep by then, so I just went to the guest room and lay there staring at the ceiling, thinking about those lights. I tried to convince myself they were planes in a holding pattern or something, but I've lived near airports before. I know what that looks like. This was different. The next morning, I brought it up at breakfast. Aaron just laughed and said I'd probably seen fishing boats or helicopters. His wife mentioned maybe it was one of those offshore wind farms being worked on, but there aren't any visible from that part of the coast. I pulled up a map later just to check. Nothing. That night, I went back out to the deck around the same time. The ocean was calm, barely any wind. I stayed out there for an hour, maybe longer. Nothing unusual. Then, just as I was about to go in, I noticed something faint, a glow on the horizon. Not a light exactly, but more like the sky was getting slightly brighter in one narrow band above the water. I thought maybe a ship had turned on its deck lights, but as I watched, the brightness spread wider and then faded out again. It was subtle, but it didn't feel natural. Around 1 a.m., I finally went to bed. I didn't say anything to Aaron that time. I went back home to Vermont a few days later and didn't think much more about it. But about a week after that, I got a text from Aaron. Just a photo taken from his deck. It showed the same horizon I'd been watching, and a faint line of white lights. There were 5 this time, not as bright as what I'd seen, but definitely the same spacing, same formation. He wrote, "They're back." I called him right away, but he didn't answer. He texted about 15 minutes later saying they were gone again. I asked if he got video. He said he tried, but the camera wouldn't focus. After that, I didn't hear anything for a couple weeks. Then one night he called me. It was almost 2 in the morning. He sounded weird, kind of shaken. Said he'd been out walking his dog near the beach when he saw the lights again, only this time they weren't on the horizon. He said they were higher up, moving slowly inland, completely silent. He said they stopped directly above him, maybe a few hundred feet up, and he could see the glow reflecting faintly on the wet sand. Then, they just lifted straight up until they disappeared into the clouds. I asked him if there was any sound, and he said no, nothing. Even the wind had died down while it was happening. He said his dog started whining before he even saw the lights and wouldn't move until they were gone. I didn't know what to say. The next day, he sent me another text. Forget last night. Probably nothing. I haven't brought it up since. This past summer, I went back to visit him again. The nights were cooler, a little foggy. One evening after dinner, I found myself back on that same deck, just staring at the horizon. The ocean was calm and dark, no boats, no lights. I told myself it was just normal, that the ocean always looks strange at night, that light refracts weird over water. But standing there, I started to notice something else. The way the waves seemed to roll in out of sync, like there was a rhythm beneath them. A faint pulse in the reflection of the moonlight, as if something far out there was pushing against the surface. It could have been anything: current, tide, distant wakes. But I remember thinking how similar the pattern looked to that first line of lights. I stayed out there until I couldn't see the horizon anymore. Later that night, I woke up and noticed the blinds in the guest room glowing faintly. I thought maybe it was just the moon coming through, but when I looked outside, the sky over the ocean was completely lit up. Not like lightning, just a steady, pale light. No sound, no movement. It lasted maybe 10 seconds before fading out completely. The next morning, the news mentioned some unidentified aerial activity over Cape Ann. A few people reported strange lights to the Coast Guard, but nothing came of it. I asked Aaron if he saw it too. He said no. But that night, when we were sitting on the deck again, he kept glancing toward the horizon every few minutes, even when we were talking about something else. I don't think he realized he was doing it. Neither of us mentioned the lights. I drove out to Lake Hartwell that Friday evening, later than I'd planned. The sun was just dipping below the pines, and there was that cold bite in the air that comes with early November. I'd been cooped up all week at my desk job in Greenville, and I just wanted a quiet night by the water to clear my head. I parked near the public boat ramp. It was deserted, except for a couple of fishing boats tied up at the far end. The wind was calm, the surface of the lake glassy. I grabbed my jacket, my thermos, and a folding chair from the trunk and walked down the short path to the shore. The water lapped softly at the stones, nothing unusual. I set up my chair near the edge, rested my thermos in the sand, and sat down, just staring out across the lake. The air smelled like wet leaves and pine, and I could hear an occasional twig snap somewhere behind me in the woods. After a few minutes, I noticed something odd. Tiny ripples forming in the water, like someone had thrown small stones, but there wasn't a wind stirring, and I didn't see any fish jumping. I froze, looking around. Nothing. No birds, no animals, nothing moving. The ripples just kept appearing in irregular patterns, spreading out across the surface in no rhythm I could understand. I got up, curious, and walked closer to the water, squinting along the surface. That's when I saw it, a faint light, dim, greenish-white, gliding just above the water. It moved slowly, almost lazily, but it wasn't floating on the surface. It hovered maybe a foot above the lake. I swore I caught a shimmer in the air around it, like heat waves off a sidewalk in July. But the air was cold, crisp. My first thought was someone messing with a flashlight on a boat somewhere, but the lake was empty. I squatted near the edge, trying to see where it came from. The light seemed aware of me. It slowed when I leaned in, then drifted away as if keeping its distance. I fumbled for my phone to film it, but when I opened the camera, all I got was static. The screen flickered, the greenish-white glow just a blur, no shape, no detail. I muttered to myself, okay, that's weird, and tried to walk toward it. The light didn't speed up or panic, it just moved gently away from me. I kept my feet in the shallow water, careful not to splash. The ripples were still forming behind it, as though the lake itself was reacting to its presence. I stopped when I realized I couldn't hear anything beyond the faint slap of water against the shore. No frogs, no birds, no wind. The kind of silence that presses against your ears until every small sound feels amplified. I thought about calling someone, but the nearest house was half a mile away, and I didn't even know if I had a signal here. The light glided closer to a small cove, moving around a patch of reeds. I followed slowly, keeping the phone raised, and the static only intensified when I pointed the camera. The glow seemed more concentrated now, a soft, steady pulse that wasn't quite like a flashlight or lantern. My stomach started knotting, like the feeling when you drive over a bridge too high and the car shakes under you. I got within maybe 20 feet of the cove, and then it happened. The light blinked out, just vanished. The lake surface went smooth, the ripples disappeared, and the reeds swayed only in the faintest current. I stood there, half crouched, scanning the area. Nothing. No trail, no reflection, no sound. The water looked completely normal, like nothing had ever been there. I backed away slowly, telling myself I was overreacting. Maybe my eyes were playing tricks in the twilight. But then I noticed the path I'd walked. My footprints in the sand were intact, but they seemed wrong, like they hadn't really pressed into the ground. I crouched and touched one with my hand. It was just sand, but somehow it didn't feel like it should be. I left the lake quickly after that, heart thumping. My thermos and chair were abandoned in the sand, forgotten in the rush to get back to the car. I didn't look back, and I didn't hear anything following me. No sound at all except my shoes on the gravel path. The moment I reached the car and started the engine, I felt a strange relief, almost like the lake and the air itself had released me. Driving home, I kept glancing in the rearview mirror. Nothing. The road was empty, the trees shadowed but normal. I thought about calling someone to talk about it, but how do you explain a faint, hovering light that leaves ripples on a glassy lake and disappears when you get close? I didn't. I just drove, gripping the wheel a little too tightly. Later that night, I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a lantern floating in the wind, but the lake was perfectly still. Maybe some phosphorescent algae, but I've fished here enough to know the water doesn't glow like that. Maybe a hallucination. I didn't feel tired or stressed that day, nothing to trigger anything like that. I checked my camera again, nothing recorded. My phone had plenty of storage, battery full, normal operation, just static where the light had been. It's been weeks now, and I still think about it. Every time I drive past Lake Hartwell, I slow down a little, stare at the water. Most nights it looks normal, but sometimes when the air is still and the lake mirrors the sky perfectly, I swear I see the faintest ripple out of nowhere moving across the water, and I feel that pull again, like the lake wants me to look closer. I don't go down to that cove anymore. I don't film it or try to follow it, but I keep thinking about those ripples. The light hovering just above the surface, the static on my phone. Whatever it wasn't natural. And even now, I don't know if I ever want to know. I woke up to the sound of my phone vibrating on the nightstand, and for a fraction of a second, thought it was my alarm. My hand groped at the dark, hit the soft case, silenced the buzz, and then everything settled back into the quiet of the house. The clock read 3:07 a.m. The dog, Nico, who sleeps at the foot of the bed when he's feeling brave, had his head on my ankle and didn't stir, which I took as a good sign. The good sign lasted until I pushed the covers back and padded to the bathroom. The hallway light was off. The house smelled faintly of cedar from the diffuser Aaron keeps on the counter, but stronger. There was a metallic edge in the air I couldn't place. What stopped me in the doorway was the bathroom mirror. Every mirror in the bathroom was fogged from the inside. I mean, the glass looked like somebody had breathed directly onto the inside of it. That soft, cloudy film you get after a hot shower, only there had been no shower. The rest of the room was cold. No steam on the bulbs, the tile under my feet wasn't warm, and the shower had been untouched. I reached out and touched the outside of the glass. It was cool and dry like the rest of the room. My fingertips left no smear. For a moment, I just stood there because the obvious explanations didn't add up in any order that made sense. The furnace had not kicked on, the humidifier wasn't running, and all the windows were closed. I rubbed my eyes and told myself I was half asleep, that I needed coffee and should go back to bed. Then a shape moved across the mirror. It was not a face, exactly, just a darker, slightly clearer silhouette slipping along the inside surface. It traced the top edge, moved in a lazy arc across the center, and stopped near the sink, as if considering the faucets. I watched it like a person watching someone else in a friend's house, curious and wary at once. When I blinked, it vanished. Not faded, not turned off, gone, like I had cleared the glass with my own eyelids. I checked the other mirror on the linen cupboard, fogged from the inside. I peered through the haze and saw the outline of the hallway reflected dimly. There were the stairs, the banister, the glow of the street lamp through the curtains in the living room. I turned away and came back. A tiny crescent of the fog had retreated, as if the mirror itself had shivered. Nico, who had followed me down the hall, pressed his shoulders against my knees and gave a single low whine. I went room to room after that, as if checking doors in a bad dream would make the situation more rational. The bedroom mirror, same thing. The full length on the closet door, fogged on the inside. Even the little medicine cabinet mirror in the downstairs powder room, which is rarely used, had the same inside fog film. Every glass surface that usually reflected me in the house carried that same odd interior haze. The windows were clear as glass, the kitchen sink was dry, and there was no steam anywhere. It made no scientific sense in the way that matters most. Things are only supposed to do this if there's hot water, humidity, or someone breathing on them. None of that was happening. I tried to record the bathroom with my phone. The camera showed the hazy mirror, but without the shape I had seen. The live view picked up a gray smear and then static, like a bad reception. I filmed for 30 seconds and played it back 3 times. The sound was normal, the little mechanical hum of the fridge and the creak of the house settling, but the file wouldn't show the silhouette. My phone battery also reads 72% despite being on the charger overnight. That made my chest tighten because I plug the phone in and rarely look at it otherwise. When I dug the charger out of the outlet, the bedside lamp flickered and went dark for half a second, then back to normal. A power hiccup. Coincidentally, everything that could be explained away, I told myself, should be. But the fog didn't make sense. Nico paced once and then lay down with his head on my slipper. He's an old dog, skeptical of excitement. His ears were on me, alert like a kid who's sure a story is coming. I made coffee even though it was early, just for the motion of it. While the kettle heated, I watched my reflection in the microwave door. The glass was clear, only the mirrors, not the tinted surfaces, not any reflective metal, only the mirrors. When Erin woke up around 6, I told her, starting with the practical stuff. All the mirrors are fogged, and then sliding into dumbfounded. She listened the way someone listens to an odd weather report, eyes concerned but not surprised in that casual, married sort of way. Erin suggested a burst of hot water. Maybe the neighbor was doing laundry? We both stood at the sink and turned every faucet in the house on for a minute, let the faucets rain, hoping warmth would clear it. When we checked, the fog remained stubbornly on the inner surfaces. The faucets didn't even seem to phase it. On one mirror, our handprints appeared on the outside only, 2 smeared ovals from where we touched the cool glass. On the inside, nothing but those same soft clouds. That was the point where the house told us it wasn't an isolated quirk. The thermostat started to read 62 when I swore I had it set to 68. The old wall clock in the hallway was off by exactly 3 minutes behind every other clock in the house. My email showed one unread message, but when I opened it, there was nothing in the inbox. Erin's phone lost GPS signal for a sliver in time, even though every tower in our area showed normal activity on the outage map. The weirdness threaded itself through the silly little mechanical things we use to feel the world is coherent. We called our neighbor Marta across the street. At first, she thought we were making some kind of joke, like, "You guys hitting some new trend?" She came over in her robe with a flashlight. She brought her phone because that's what people do now when something is wrong. Marta stayed maybe 10 minutes, checked a mirror, frowned, and then looked at us like she was trying to choose between calling someone official and not wanting to make a fuss. She left saying, "Keep an eye on it," which is the same as saying nothing at all. That afternoon, when I finally felt brave enough, I sat down and looked into one of the fogged mirrors for a long time. The haze had a faint motion to it now, like something breathing under glass. It moved around the edges as if searching. Once, in the corner of the bathroom mirror, the haze condensed into a darker shape that could have been the suggestion of shoulders. And then it was gone when I looked directly at it, not when I blinked this time, but when I dared to turn my head and look away for a second, like tracking an animal through trees, and then it slips behind a trunk. By evening, I had to leave. I had a meeting, and the idea of sitting under fluorescent light and pretending nothing was off felt unbearable. Before I went, I made sure to close all the blinds and cover the big bedroom mirror with a sheet. It was a childish gesture, but covering it made the house feel less exposed, like putting on armor. Driving to the meeting, I kept thinking through possibilities. Condensation from a humidifier on the inside of the glass? Could a slow leak in a window cause it? Could some chemical be reacting on the mirrors? I even tried imaging the very unlikely and allowed my thoughts to dip into metaphors, reflections misbehaving like a trick mirror in a carnival. But they were metaphors, nothing more useful than that. I came back at midnight. The house smelled the same faint, metallic scent, as if something electronic had been dragged and tested. The front light was off. The street was quiet. I peeled the sheet off the bedroom mirror with a bit of theatrical courage and stood there with the dog padding at my feet. The glass was clear. Not completely. There was a faint line around the edge, like a memory of fog, but otherwise normal. The hallway clock read the right time. The thermostat showed 68. My phone read 100% battery. The house hummed like something that had put away an unexpected instrument and decided to let the world think everything had been normal all along. I wiped the bathroom mirror out of habit and found under the cloth a thin crescent smudged on the inside side surface. Not a finger, not a reflection. Just a faint arc that caught the light differently when I tilted my head. I took a picture of it with my phone. The photo came out gray and flat. When I zoomed in later, it was just pixels. I didn't sleep well. I left the bedroom mirror covered for a week after that, and every time I passed it, I felt the same little prickle. Curiosity mixed with the animal sense you get when someone has been in your house and you haven't noticed. We put a small camera out in the hall for a few nights, motion sensor cheap thing from Amazon, but the footage showed only empty rooms and the dog padding through in the middle of the night, sniffing at nothing and then moving on. No shape, no fog, no one breathing on the inside of the glass. I don't have an answer. The house went back to ordinary in many ways. Clocks accurate, phones charged, the thermostat obedient. And yet once in a while, when the weather turns and the house takes on that particular hush, I'll catch the faint metallic tang at the back of my throat and look at the mirrors differently. If I pass one at 3 in the morning, I'll run a hand over the outside of the glass just to make sure it's cool. Sometimes, when I'm brushing my teeth, I watch the inside of the mirror the way you watch the road at dusk, expecting something small and inexplicable to appear, and then, if I blink too long, disappear again. I drove up the service road to the old fire break because the horizon there is low and the light from town doesn't smear the sky. It was a January night, bitter enough that my cheeks went numb when I stepped out of the car, but the sky was the clean kind that only cold nights give you. Pin-sharp stars, a thin Milky Way, no moon to wash anything out. I brought a blanket, thermos of coffee, and a cheap foam pad to lie on. The plan was simple. Lay back, look up, and not think about anything that had to be done on Monday. For the first hour, I did exactly that. The usual small annoyances, my phone buzzing with pointless group messages, some passing headlights on the valley road far below, didn't matter. The cold cut the sound a little. The world felt physically smaller, contained by the horizon and the sky. Constellations I'd mostly forgotten returned to the edges of my vision the way familiar rooms do. I felt slow and steady, like an animal that's found a patch of sun. Around 11, a streak flicked across the sky slightly to my left. I sat up reflexively, wiped my hands on my jeans, and watched. It was quick, thin and white, like a meteor, but with an odd, steady brightness, not the ragged flare meteors usually have. It moved from near the western ridge to the center of the valley and vanished in a clean line as if a single frame had been cut out of the night. I said out loud, "Huh." I'd seen meteors before, but they never looked like someone had drawn a pencil line with light. I reached for my phone to record the slope where it had gone and noticed the horizon looked wrong in a way I couldn't name, like a photograph slightly out of focus at the edges. The radio in the background of some far-off farmhouse cut out for a second. My thermos hissed a small high note as it cooled on the ground. I set the phone down and lay back again. The air felt thinner now, as if someone had opened a window in an otherwise sealed room. I looked to the spot where the streak had finished and waited, half expecting nothing to happen. I told myself I was being silly, that meteors are common, that I should get more sleep and stop reading conspiracy forums at 2 in the morning. The night was so quiet that my thoughts sounded loud, a kind of nervous commentary. Then the streak came back. It appeared in the very exact spot where the first one had vanished and moved in the opposite direction, east to west, tracing the original line back almost perfectly, as if someone had hit rewind on a film. The backwards pass was slower than the first, and for a moment it looked like two separate lights in perfect registration. The first one's path still burned faintly in my sight, and then the second one rewound over it. There was no double exposure, no trail of smoke, just a clean, precise retrace. My initial disbelief turned into something sharper. I sat up so fast my blanket slid, and I had to adjust my headlamp. My hands were shaking. I pointed the phone again, thumb fumbling to hit record, but the live image was weird, grainy, and where the streak should have been, the screen showed a fuzzy smear of gray that didn't resolve into the crisp line I could see with my eyes. I filmed anyway. The video saved as nothing more than a wash of light and static when I checked it later. For the next minute, the reversed streak and the original ghost I thought I'd seen seemed to hang over one another. The second pass mirrored the first with uncanny precision. Speed, angle, the point of beginning and ending, all mirrored. It felt like watching someone trace your handwriting with a steady, practiced hand. I couldn't tell whether I should feel amazed or stupid for being frightened. A small, practical fear crept in after that. What do you do when something in the sky does not conform to your ideas of objects? I tried calling Mark, who's into sky watching and would probably have said something useful. Satellite? Re-entry fragment? But my phone had one bar and the call didn't go through. I texted him a photo that didn't show anything but a smudge. No reply. A distant hound barked once, sharp, and then the night swallowed it like a hand closing. The wind, there had been a breeze a little while earlier, died as if someone had gathered it into their fists. The silence that followed was full in a way that made my ears feel crowded. I realized then that I couldn't hear the road below at all. Normally at this height you get a faint ribbon of tires and the rumble from the far quarry. Tonight the valley made no sound. The thought that came next was stupid but immediate. Maybe there were others here. I scanned the ridge with the beam from my headlamp, sweeping the scrub, the low laurel, the fence posts. Dark. No tent lights, no reflective gear, nothing. The only lights were the stars and that lingering faint smear in my head where the streak had gone. A minute later, the light appeared again. Same place, same path forward as the first time. And again, moments after it vanished, there was a backward pass across the exact same line. This rhythm continued. Forward, pause, reverse, 3 times within 10 minutes. Each forward pass felt slightly sharper than the last. Each rewind as smooth as a practiced hand erasing pencil. The effect wasn't fast enough to blur into motion. You could see it move, watch it trace. I started timing them in my head, trying to give structure to what I was seeing. The forward pass lasted maybe 2 or 3 seconds. The return took 4 or 5. It was like someone walking a line, then returning more slowly to check their work. I tried to rationalize. Satellite re-entry moves in one direction. A plane glows in its own pattern and has navigation lights. Drones hover and make a sound. There was no sound. Meteors don't reverse. The only analog I could come up with was a movie projector running backward, and even that satisfied nothing. The reverse traces matched each forward stroke down to an imperceptible wobble. I stood up and took a few steps toward the fence, the cold biting through my jeans. The closer I got to the edge, the more the air felt like a thin sheet vibrating against my face. Goosebumps rose, and not from cold. I had the urge to call someone who would say normal things and calm me, but everyone I could think to call had odd hours or a job or a life. Besides, what would I even say? Come outside. I don't understand how parabolas work in the sky tonight. On the third cycle, something else happened. As the light traced backward, the stars directly behind it dimmed a notch, as if the streak carried a shadow that came from above, not the ground. It was subtle enough that I almost missed it, but now, when I looked at that area of sky, the familiar thumbprint of the Milky Way seemed fractionally different. I checked my watch. The digital clock said 11:32. When the streak finished its backward motion, the watch flicked briefly and read 11:31. The numbers clicked by on their own a fraction of a second later and corrected. I stared at that tiny discrepancy until my eyes watered. My rational self kept saying, camera glitch, wristwatch battery, optical illusion. The rest of me, smaller, older, animal, knew something had altered sequence, rhythm, the way the world was telling time for a breath. The texture of normalcy had a seam in it now. At one point, I slumped back on the pad and laughed because laughter felt safer than panic. It came out too sharp. I thought of calling someone to drive up and look, but a selfish voice in my head kept me still. This felt private, like a tiny, impossible thing not yet spoiled by witnesses. I wanted to be the person who had seen it, unshared, and therefore somehow truer. But I filmed again, hands steadier, trying to catch the motion. When I played it back, the pixels in the phone stuttered during the backward pass, like the camera buffer hiccuped. The timestamp on the clip didn't match the clock on my dash by a few seconds. The file stuttered and saved as two separate clips where there should have been one continuous moment. I scrolled through, frame by frame. The streak was a smear in some frames, absent in others. The audio was a thin hiss. By midnight, the pattern had stopped. The sky returned to its plain high parlance of stars. My thermos was empty, and my knees hurt from sitting wrong. I packed slowly, stuffing the blanket into the trunk with hands that still felt marginally foreign. The light below me on the valley road came back like normal sound after a bell. The far quarry thinned into a low sigh, and a dog somewhere started barking for real. On the drive down the service road, the air felt ordinary again. I took the bends slow because I didn't trust my head. Every straight run felt like the beginning of something. My phone finally buzzed with a reply from Mark. Probably satellites. People see weird stuff, especially tonight. His voice settled me in an adult sort of way. I wanted that certainty to be true. At home, I didn't sleep well. In the dark, the backward traces replayed in the periphery of my thoughts like a film loop you can't fast forward. In the morning, I checked the videos again. The longest clip showed a whitewash that corresponded to what I'd seen, the forward and backward passes, but the biggest detail was the gap where the frames jumped. The timestamps on my phone and the dash clock were off by 12 seconds across 3 clips. My watch ticked like a sensible animal. I've been back up to that fire break twice since. The nights were clear both times, but the sky was polite and conventional. Satellites, a meteor here, a plane there. The exact place the streak had come from felt the same as always. Scrub, rock, fence posts, the same low sweep of horizon. Nothing changed on the ground to say the sky had been anything but a vault. People I told shrugged, camera artifact, atmospheric lensing, coincidence. Those responses are reasonable. They are also quiet in the way of someone stepping away from something fragile. If I had to write the event down for a report, I'd put down the facts. Time, location, the flashes forward and back, the timestamps shifting, and call it anomalous, the kind of thing you mark and set in a file. That would be a tidy end. I keep the memories separate from the everyday stuff. When I lie in bed and look at the ceiling, occasionally I'll picture the streak reversing, ink running backward across paper. It's a clear, precise image. I don't make grand claims. I don't say it was alien or divine. I say I saw a motion in the sky that behaved like a hand tracing and then erasing. And because it matched itself so exactly, it left me with the small, strange impression that for a few minutes the night was being checked for errors and then set back in order. It was a red-eye from Seattle to Chicago, middle of February, one of those flights where everyone's half asleep before the plane even leaves the ground. I'd been in Seattle for work and had an early meeting the next morning, so I took the cheapest flight I could find, aisle seat 25B. The flight left around 11:40 p.m. The cabin lights dimmed right after takeoff, and most people went quiet. I couldn't sleep though. I never can on planes. I just scrolled through my phone, read a few emails, that kind of thing. About 40 minutes in, I leaned over to stretch and glanced toward the window. The guy in 25A, younger guy, headphones in, hoodie up, was asleep. His window shade was halfway open. I could see the faint glow of the wing lights and the usual black void beyond. But as we started banking east, something caught my eye. It looked like another plane flying below us, a little to the right, maybe a few thousand feet down. It wasn't flashing like normal aircraft lights. It just had this dull white glow, almost like it was lit from the inside. At first, I figured it was a reflection from our own lights, but as I watched, it stayed exactly in sync with us. Every small turn, every angle of descent or correction, it mirrored us perfectly. I waited for it to drift away or change position, but it didn't. It just kept following. I leaned closer to the window, squinting past the reflection of the cabin lights. I could make out its shape better then, oval, or maybe like a teardrop seen from above. No wings, no tail, just a smooth, faintly glowing form keeping pace with us, steady as a shadow. I sat back and tried to play it off. Could have been another flight on a parallel route, maybe at a different altitude. That happens all the time. But when the captain came on a few minutes later to say we'd be adjusting course slightly for weather, I felt the plane turn, and the light below turned with it, perfectly. Not delayed, not off by even a second. I stared at it for a long time. My eyes kept adjusting between the darkness and the glow. I remember thinking how oddly bright it looked for being that far below. It wasn't blinding or anything, just clear, defined. I finally nudged the guy next to me. "Hey, sorry. You mind if I look out the window for a sec?" He mumbled something, lifted the shade all the way up, and leaned back to sleep again. I pressed my face closer to the glass. It was still there. We were probably over Montana by then, miles of nothing but dark. No towns, no lights below us. Just this thing gliding under us like a reflection that shouldn't exist. The weirdest part was how constant it was. We hit some turbulence, little jolts, and it kept moving smooth and steady like the bumps didn't affect it. I thought about getting a flight attendant, but the rational part of my brain kept saying, "You're tired, it's late, it's just some weird light phenomenon." Then the seatbelt sign came on, and the captain's voice came through again. "Folks, we're getting reports of some unexpected crosswinds at this altitude, so we're going to climb a bit." The engines deepened, the plane tilted upward, and that glowing thing followed. Same rate of climb. Same distance below. I felt something in my stomach twist. I watched it what felt like 20 minutes, but could have been less. The longer I looked, the less sure I was of the scale. At times it seemed far below us, other times closer, like it was rising or shrinking. The glow had this pulsing quality, slow, almost like breathing, but not rhythmic enough to be mechanical. Then, just as I was starting to convince myself I'd imagined it, everything outside went pitch black. Not cloudy dark, just gone. The glow, the faint horizon, all of it disappeared for maybe 2 seconds. When the view came back, the glowing shape was gone. I blinked a few times and leaned closer to the window. Nothing. Just stars and the red light blinking on our wingtip. I sat back, trying to decide if I just zoned out. Maybe I'd been staring too long and my eyes had played tricks on me. Then, maybe 5 minutes later, I caught a flicker. Far off to the left this time. The same dull, white glow, smaller but moving fast. It zipped parallel to us for a few seconds, then slowed and matched speed again. That was when I noticed something else. The cabin felt quiet. Not just the usual hum of the engines, but like everything had dampened. My ears popped slightly. No one else around me seemed to notice. A couple people were sleeping, a few had headphones in. The glow drifted closer, angling beneath our wing. I leaned as far as I could to keep it in view. It hovered there, steady, until I realized it wasn't lighting up the wing at all. The glow didn't reflect on anything. It was like light that didn't interact with the plane or the air or anything around it. The engines made a deep, low whine, and I felt a slight shudder. Not turbulence exactly, more like the pressure shifted. I looked back out and saw that the glow had risen higher, almost level with us now. And that's when the guy in the window seat finally stirred. He rubbed his eyes, leaned toward the window, and froze. "What the hell is that?" he whispered. I said, "You see it too?" He nodded slowly. "It's been following us?" "Yeah, for a while." We both watched in silence as it drifted closer, until it was about parallel with the wing. Still no detail to it, just this smooth white oval, faintly pulsating. Then, without warning, the entire cabin lights flickered. Just once. Half a second. When they came back on, the glow was gone. He looked at me like he wanted to say something, but didn't. After a few seconds, he pulled his shade down and just sat there, staring at the seat in front of him. I stayed awake the rest of the flight, watching through the tiny gap where the shade didn't fully close. I didn't see it again until we started descending toward Chicago. We were lower now, clouds beneath us, lights of small towns starting to appear. As the plane banked to line up with the runway, I saw the glow again, this time above us, faint and distant, moving in the opposite direction. No one else reacted. It was gone before I could even tap the window guy again. When we landed, I felt drained. Everyone else just grabbed their bags and shuffled off, yawning, stretching. I didn't say anything to anyone. I tried to check flight radar later that morning, see if any planes had been on a similar route, maybe a refueling jet or military craft. Nothing. The airspace below our path was empty at that time. I didn't think about it again for a while. Then about 3 weeks later, I was on another night flight, this time from Denver to Atlanta, and I caught myself glancing out the window more than usual. It was clear that night, no clouds, lots of stars. Halfway through the flight, I saw it again. Same dull white glow, same slow pace, this time much farther away. I didn't point it out to anyone. It didn't follow us for long, maybe 5 minutes. Then it faded out, like someone dimmed a light until it disappeared. When we landed, I checked the window reflection on the inside of the plane to make sure there wasn't something that could have explained it. A reflection from a phone, a reading light, anything. But there wasn't. I even tried to recreate it a week later on a short evening flight back home. I booked the window seat this time, watched the reflection patterns, looked for other planes. Nothing ever matched what I saw. The glow hasn't shown up again since then, but I still catch myself looking for it. Especially during turns, those moments when the plane tilts just enough to give you a view of the dark below. There's this instant where everything outside the window is black, just the faint curve of the wing, and I almost expect to see that dull, pale shape keeping pace underneath us, following every move like a mirror. My phone buzzed on the nightstand and woke me before the sound finished. I rolled over, squinted at the screen, and saw my own number staring back at me like a dare. It said video call in small letters, and there was no name attached, just the digits I'd been assigned for 8 years now. For a second, I thought I'd set it to forward or accidentally hit something in my pocket. I thumbed the green button out of habit. The screen filled with grain at first, then a dark image that didn't resolve into anything familiar. The audio came in as a low, steady rumble, like wind moving through a metal grate or distant traffic under a bridge. It had texture, a mechanical quality that made the hairs on my forearms prick up. No one spoke. I tapped the screen to flip the camera so whoever was calling could see me. Nothing changed. The rumble kept rolling like a wave under everything. The room looked wrong through my phone, darker and with a sort of slow smear where light should be. For a moment, I thought the feed was from outside the house. It drifted, subtly as if the camera were moving, and when the image steadied again, I recognized the edge of my own bedside lamp, the slant of the headboard. The feed was looking at my bed. I felt stupidly exposed, like I'd left the curtains open, until I realized the angle wasn't mine. The camera was coming from somewhere above, not from the doorway. It was a ceiling shot of my own bedroom, but the mattress looked slept in a way I didn't feel. I sat up, and the rumble shifted a fraction of a decibel as if it had noticed movement. I kept the phone to my ear because that felt safer than looking at the screen. I tried to call back, hit end, redialed my own number. Rings. Rings. The call went to voicemail with a mechanical thunk that cut the rumble clean. My voicemail had no new messages. When I slid out of bed, the room smelled faintly of metal and rain. The digital clock on the nightstand read 3:11 a.m. in blinking amber, which somehow made the whole thing more real. I fumbled for the light, turned it on, and the lamp came up as it always did, warm, ordinary, the glow not touching the ceiling, like the video had. My phone battery read 72%. I glanced at the feed again. The image froze on a dark blur and stayed dark even after I pulled down the notification shade. The record showed the call came from within the house. It listed my number as the caller, and then under call details it said, outgoing 2:14 a.m. My chest went hollow. That time should have been an hour plus ago. Outside, the street had that quiet that feels like a borrowed thing. No late trucks, no porch lights left on. For the past few days, our neighborhood had felt off in little ways. The clock above the pizzeria's door had skipped 5 minutes twice over the weekend. Mrs. Klein across the street had asked if anyone else's microwave had turned itself on at odd hours. Last night, the power had blinked for exactly 7 seconds and then steadied. I'd joked about storms coming in, but the jokes didn't land. Now it felt like a pile of tiny loose things that, assembled, made a wrong shape. I got dressed quick and padded out into the hall. My cat, Scout, perked up and came to the threshold. Her fur bristled the way she did before thunderstorms. She cut across my legs and stared at the back door like she expected to see someone there. I told myself I was being ridiculous and opened the door anyway. The air outside smelled of wet pavement and wood smoke from a neighbor's fireplace. In the distance, the low rumble I'd heard on the video pulsed once and stopped. I couldn't work out whether it came from far away or right under my feet. Down the block, the Joneses had left a porch light on. Their house was dark beyond that, but a thin glow framed the curtains like a late-night TV. We waved when we passed each other earlier in the week, and I'd thought nothing of how tired Mr. Jones looked. Now, I noticed his silhouette in profile at the window, and for a second his head moved in a way that wasn't quite his control. He seemed to be listening to something I couldn't hear. I walked to the corner where the bus stop sat and sat down on the metal bench because moving didn't make things clearer. The rumble returned, this time as a distant freight. Heavy, even. A car went by and its tires hissed through the puddles, normal and ordinary. My phone buzzed again. Same number, same video call. I didn't pick up. The phone kept ringing at odd intervals. 2 minutes, 6, nearly 10. Always from myself, always sending that same low-slung sound into the world. I started filming the front of my house with the spare battery-powered camera I keep in the hall for storms, thinking some other person's phone had been spoofing mine. The footage showed nothing at first, then a thin smear of light crossing the yard like heat over asphalt, and at the exact second the smear crossed the frame, the call log cycled a new outgoing time, 2:34 a.m. The timestamps jittered on the camera and on my phone like they were trying to agree and failing. I went back inside because I wanted to be rational and warm and physically present where my things were. Inside, the kettle on the stove was slightly warm to the touch, though I was sure I hadn't used it since dinner. The bedside lamp's cord was still looped where it always sat. Nothing was disturbed. Scout hopped up onto the bed and curled into a tight ball like she did when she wanted to be left alone, and I sat on the edge and tried to steady my breathing. The house felt inhabited by some patient thing that watched, measured, then did nothing. At 2:49, the doorbell rang. I froze. My hands were cold enough to make the metal phone case ache. I looked at the peephole and saw nothing but the dark of the porch. Through the glass, the world looked flat, drained of detail. I opened the door an inch and called, "Who is it?" My voice sounded smaller than it should have. No answer. A breeze pushed past me and I smelled salt and a faint disinfectant, two smells that do not sit together. The police came after a neighbor called when the doorbell rang again, and then the phone started ringing from within the house. 2 patrol cars idled in the street with the emergency lights off out of an excess of caution. An officer asked me for my ID, asked if I'd authorized any device to call my number, and I told her the truth. It had called me twice already, that the camera on the porch had caught something like a heat smear, and that I'd answered the first one and heard a metal wind and watched my own bedroom on the screen. She wrote it down and didn't look surprised because she had the professional training to hide disbelief. She took the laptop with the camera footage and said they'd log it. They sat in the squad car for a long time and chewed the inside of their cheeks with the sort of attention that belongs to people who wait through unlikely calls. The older one, Officer Ramirez, said, "Sometimes people spoof numbers, like that was a thing that could be typed into being and made sense of." The younger one kept glancing at his phone and back at the house and kept swallowing. I wanted to ask them if they'd ever had their own number call them from inside a house. I couldn't figure out how to ask without sounding like I had finally lost the shape of things. The phone rang again, loud and close. This time, I didn't let it go to voicemail. I hit the green button with my thumb and held the phone steady. The image filled the screen, my bedroom from above, slightly out of focus, and the rumble rolled under it like waves. But there, in the corner of the frame, something shifted. A darker patch of shadow that seemed to tilt the same way my head does when I'm thinking. The timestamp in the corner of the feed read 2:14 a.m. Again, not now, not the present. When I looked at the clock on my wall, it read 3:17. "Hello?" I said to the black glass because it felt better than listening to the hum. The rattle in the feed got louder for a second, and then the screen filled with static and the call dropped. The phone reset to the home screen with my number still listed at the top. I backed away from it like it might bite. The officers left without making a report beyond the usual line items. "We'll file it," Officer Ramirez said. "We'll check the logs." That meant the city would have a thing in a folder about a house with a phantom dial tone and a neighbor who watched her bedroom from a camera that shouldn't have been able to call itself. It felt like being given a piece of paper that would not help. I sat down at the table with my hands wrapped around a mug of coffee, too weak to move me. The morning light, thin, gray, started to come through the blinds. I scrolled through my camera roll and found a single new photo I didn't remember taking. Me, asleep on my side, hair stuck to my forehead, study lamp on, blanket half kicked off. The east-facing window showed the faintest blur of something outside, like fog made of glass. The file's metadata said it had been captured at 2:13 a.m. I tried to make sense of my own timeline, but couldn't. My phone said the photo was created at the same instant my own number had been calling me from inside the house. I drove to work because leaving town felt like admitting the problem belonged to me. On the way, I called Mom and told her about the calls. She said, "Maybe someone's pranking you, Han, or your phone's acting up." She always used the up tone when she wanted to smooth worry into normal. I saw the pizzeria's clock again as I passed. This time it read correctly. The day progressed with the small, ordinary tasks of being a person. Emails, a meeting with a client who wanted a logo redrawn, a barista who wrote my name on the cup wrong. The world calibrated itself into little predictable clicks. All of it felt like a set of parts that would, if left alone, keep the machine of life turning. That night, I locked the doors twice and left some lights on. Scout jumped up on the bed and wound herself into my side. At 11:08 p.m., my phone buzzed once and went to voicemail. No call, no log, no new files. The rumble did not return. I'm writing this down because the house still seems normal, and that alone is a kind of answer I can live with. The photo of me on the bed sits in my phone beneath the others like evidence in a puzzle. And when I scroll past it, I have to remind myself I really was there that night, in that bed, with the lamp on and the world buzzing with tiny, ordinary noises. But sometimes at 2:14 in the morning, if I wake and look at the ceiling, I swear I can hear something like wind through metal. It pulls at that logic, the most reasonable, boring part of me, and I hold the covers up to my chin like that will be enough. I woke up around 3:30 a.m. to the smell first. It was faint, metallic, like something had been burning softly in the room, but not enough to set off any alarms. My bedroom was dark, the kind of dark that makes it hard to tell shapes apart, but the smell made me sit up instantly. My heart was racing before I even had my eyes open. I flicked on the lamp next to the bed, and that's when I saw it. A thin line of grayish white ash running across the carpet, perfectly straight from one wall to the other. I froze, not sure if I was seeing things or just dreaming. I rubbed my eyes and looked again. Same thing. The carpet fibers were singed slightly along the edge of the line, but nothing else in the room showed any damage. No smoke, no scorch marks on the walls, no odor lingering anywhere else except in the room itself. I got out of bed slowly, careful not to disturb the line. Bear, my dog, was asleep in his crate at the foot of the bed. He didn't stir. I bent down to touch the ash with my finger, half expecting it to smear or disappear, but it was real, dry, cool, and strangely clean, like it had been placed there deliberately. I checked the rest of the room. Everything was in its normal place. My laptop was closed on the desk. Clothes were folded. Nothing smelled burnt, except that one tiny line across the carpet. I had left the window cracked slightly for ventilation, but the night air didn't carry anything unusual. I tried to convince myself it was a dream, but the line was too precise for that. I'd been sleeping in this room for years, and I'd never seen anything like it. I grabbed my phone and checked the clock. 3:32 a.m. I texted my friend Jake, just, "Call me when you wake up. Weird thing happened." Of course, I knew he'd be asleep too, but it was like doing something normal would make me feel less crazy. I went to the kitchen for water, half watching the line from the corner of my eye. When I returned, I noticed something else. The line wasn't just straight, it was perfectly aligned with the edge of the desk. Not the room, not the walls exactly, but the desk. Like someone had measured it. I started pacing the room, trying to find a rational explanation. Candle wax? No candles in the room. Incense? Nothing like that. Electrical sparks? Everything was unplugged except the lamp. I even checked the smoke detector. No beep, no flash, just the faint smell lingering in the air. Bear woke up then, whining softly. He looked at me, then down at the line and growled once, not a normal warning growl. Low, almost deliberate. I froze. He'd never reacted like that to anything before. I knelt and petted him, trying to calm him down. He stayed tense, ears forward, staring at the ash. I decided to take a picture, thinking maybe that would help me process it. My phone camera didn't pick up the ash clearly at all. It showed a faint gray blur, but the edges were almost impossible to make out. In person, it was sharp, almost like someone had used a ruler to drag ash across the carpet. Then I noticed the faint smell again, stronger this time, not smoky or pungent, more like hot metal, like a soldering iron left too long. I followed it toward the window. The smell didn't intensify near the vent or air conditioner. It stayed inside the room. I went back to the bed and saw the line again. Something about it bothered me in a way I couldn't describe. It wasn't threatening, it wasn't alive, but it felt deliberate, like it had been placed there to be seen. My stomach tightened. I checked the rest of the house, no signs of ash elsewhere. The kitchen, living room, bathrooms, all normal. I even opened the windows, thinking maybe smoke from outside had drifted in. Nothing. The air smelled clean except in my bedroom. I tried sleeping on the couch in the living room. I didn't doze off for long. Every time I closed my eyes, I imagined the lines stretching across the carpet, exact and deliberate. Bear stayed at my side, tense, ears flicking toward the bedroom. By morning, the smell had faded, though the line remained. I swept carefully around it, thinking maybe it was something I could clean or vacuum. But it didn't smear. It stayed perfectly straight, almost as if the carpet itself had been marked that way. I called my friend Jake later that morning. I described it in detail. He suggested it might be some kind of strange electrical issue, maybe the lamp or wiring in the wall sparking without triggering the smoke detector. I checked the outlets. Nothing. No warmth, no scorch marks. Every outlet in the room tested normal. I thought about calling an electrician, but I couldn't explain what they'd find. It wasn't a wiring problem. It wasn't sparking, shorting, or burning anything else. Just that one thin line of ash, perfectly straight, and the lingering smell of burnt metal. Over the next few days, I tried to rationalize it. Dust, tiny rodent incident, candle ash settling overnight. None of it fit. I even cleaned the room thoroughly, hoping it would vanish after vacuuming. But it stayed, faint but defined, almost like the ash refused to be removed. One night, a week later, I woke again around the same time. I'd been sleeping lightly. The lines seemed to shimmer, though I'm not sure how else to describe it. Not glowing, not moving, but almost like it was vibrating at the edge of my perception. Bear growled, low and steady, staring at the carpet again. I didn't touch it. I stayed in the living room that night, watching the bedroom from the doorway. The room felt colder than usual, though the thermostat hadn't changed. The smell was back faintly, metal and sharp. I eventually fell asleep on the couch, but I kept waking up to the same faint odor. Bear stayed beside me, restless. When morning came, the line was still there, unchanging, but the smell was gone. I've since moved the furniture slightly, cleaned the carpet rigorously, but the line persists. It's faint now, almost a shadow of ash rather than actual powder, but it's there, running from wall to wall, perfectly straight, perfectly deliberate. I still wake up sometimes in the middle of the night smelling that faint metal, and I check the line. It doesn't move, it doesn't grow, but every time I see it, I feel the same tightness in my chest. I don't talk about it to most people. Friends dismiss it as imagination, dreams, or stress. But I know what I saw. The precision, the smell, Bear's reaction. It's all real. And for now, that line is still there, marking my carpet, marking my life in a way I can't explain. It was late August, one of those heavy, humid nights where the air doesn't move at all. I was sitting on the porch after dinner, just killing time before bed. My wife, Erin, was already inside watching something on TV, and I had a beer and a bug candle going, half watching the sky. We live on the edge of town, right where the houses start to thin out into fields and patches of woods. It's quiet most nights except for the bugs, the constant wall of sound from crickets and cicadas that never really stops this time of year. That night was no different, at least at first. I'd been sitting out there maybe 15-20 minutes. The sky was hazy, not much wind, just that thick stillness that comes before a storm but never quite turns into one. I remember thinking I could hear the hum of the streetlight at the end of the driveway under all the insect noise. Then it all cut off. Every sound. Just gone. No crickets, no cicadas, no frogs from the ditch across the road. Nothing. The kind of silence that makes your ears ring. I thought maybe my hearing had popped or something, like when you come up fast in an elevator, but it wasn't that. The air itself felt wrong. Too still, too heavy. I sat there frozen, listening, waiting for something to start back up. I don't know why, but I remember checking my watch without even thinking about it. It was 10:47 p.m. exactly. The silence lasted long enough for me to get uncomfortable. Not scared yet, just aware. I could hear my own breathing. I started counting seconds in my head, maybe out of habit. Around the 30-second mark, a sound faded in, a high-pitched tone. It wasn't loud, not at first. Just this thin, sharp ringing that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Not like a whistle or a machine. It didn't pulse or change, just one steady pitch hanging in the air. I stood up, looking toward the tree line across the yard. It was too dark to see much, just the faint outlines of the oaks and the glow of the streetlight through the branches. The sound didn't seem closer or farther, just there, like the air itself was making it. Erin opened the front door then, asking if I'd called her. I turned, and she froze too. "You hear that?" she said. I nodded. We both just stood there, listening. The sound didn't waver. It was high enough to make your teeth hurt a little if you focused on it. After another few seconds, she said, "It's the TV, right?" and went back inside. I followed her in, mostly because I didn't want to be out there alone anymore. Inside, it was quieter. The tone was still there, but muffled, like it was outside the walls. The TV was playing fine. I muted it, thinking maybe there was interference or something in the speakers, but no, the tone stayed exactly the same. Then the lights flickered once. Not enough to go out, just that quick dip you get when the power grid hiccups. Erin gave me this look, kind of half annoyed, half nervous. "Probably the transformer again," she said, but she didn't sound convinced. I went back out to check the yard. The air felt colder. That was the first thing I noticed. Not cool, like a breeze. It was still hot, but there was a sharpness to it, like walking into a room with an open freezer. The bug still hadn't come back. The tone kept going, unbroken. I started walking down the driveway toward the road. The sound didn't change as I moved, but at some point I noticed a faint vibration under my feet. It wasn't strong enough to rattle anything, just a subtle tremor you'd barely notice if you weren't paying attention. When I reached the end of the driveway, I looked down the street both ways. Nothing but empty asphalt and a few porch lights glowing in the distance. No cars, no wind. Then I saw something. A light about 100 yards away, moving through the trees on the far side of the road. It wasn't bright, just a faint white glow, steady and slow. My first thought was someone walking with a flashlight, but the way it moved didn't fit. It wasn't bouncing or sweeping around, it was drifting, level, about 10 feet off the ground. I watched it pass between two trees and vanish. The sound didn't stop. A few seconds later, another light appeared, farther down. Same glow, same slow, deliberate movement. This one paused for a second before sliding sideways, not turning, just gliding like it was on rails, then disappearing behind a stand of pines. I stood there in the dark for what felt like forever, watching for more. Nothing. The tone ended as suddenly as it began. No fade out, just silence again. And then, one by one, the crickets started up. It was almost mechanical, like they were turning back on in sequence. I walked back to the porch, my ears ringing from the sudden return of sound. Erin opened the door as I got there. "It stopped," she said. "Yeah," I said. "Did the power flicker again?" She shook her head. "No, but the TV froze for a second. Just the picture, not the sound." We didn't talk about it much after that. We went to bed around midnight. Around 2 a.m., I woke up to a faint humming noise coming from outside. Not the same tone. This was lower, almost like a generator running far away. I got up, looked out the window. The yard was dark, but I could see a faint glow in the sky beyond the trees. Not lightning, not a plane. Just a soft, colorless light that seemed to shift slightly, like it was moving behind clouds. I stood there for maybe a minute before it faded. When I checked the clock, it was 2:19. The next morning, Erin mentioned she'd woken up too, around the same time. She said she thought she heard the refrigerator humming louder than usual. When I told her what I saw, she gave me that same uncertain look, the kind people give when they don't want to call you crazy, but also don't want to believe you. I didn't bring it up again until a few days later. We were having coffee out on the porch Saturday morning. It was cooler, bright and clear, the kind of day that makes the whole week before feel like a dream. Around 9, our neighbor Tom came over to borrow a socket wrench. He mentioned something weird. Said his dog had gone nuts a few nights earlier, whining and scratching at the door around 11. Wouldn't calm down for almost an hour. I asked him which night that was. He said Thursday, the same night. I didn't tell him what happened, but later when I was mowing the yard, I noticed something in the grass near the end of the driveway. 3 small circular spots about a foot wide each where the grass had gone pale and brittle, like it had been scorched but not burned. They were spaced evenly apart in a line that pointed toward the trees across the road. The mower stuttered a little when I passed over them, like it hit a magnetic pull or drag for half a second, then went back to normal. By the time Erin came out, the marks already looked lighter, like the color was returning. I didn't mention them. The next few nights were normal. The insects were loud again, the air heavy and alive the way it always is in late summer. But every once in a while, around the time, 10:47, I'd stop what I was doing and listen, half expecting the silence to come back. It hasn't. Not yet. But a couple of times since then, I've caught that high, thin tone faintly, just under the noise of everything else. Not constant, not strong. Just there for a few seconds, like it's testing the air, waiting for the right time to return. I'd been hiking the Pine Ridge Trail near Mount Hood in Oregon that morning, and it was colder than I expected for late September. The kind of cold that seeps into your bones if you stop moving for even a few minutes. I was wearing my usual layers, a flannel under a down vest, gloves, wool socks, but I still felt the chill. The trail was quiet, only the crunch of leaves under my boots and the occasional bird call. The sky was overcast, the clouds low and gray, with that heavy dampness that makes everything smell like wet pine and soil. I'd been hiking alone for hours, which I normally liked. I find that solitude helps me think. But this morning, there was this nagging sense that I wasn't alone, even though I hadn't seen another person all day. Nothing obvious, no footsteps, no voices, just a feeling that I was being watched. Around 10:30, I stopped at a bend where the trail narrowed, with steep rock walls on one side and thick pines on the other. I set my pack down to grab water, and that's when I noticed it. A shimmer in the air about 20 feet ahead of me. At first, I thought it was heat rising off a sunlit rock, but there was no sun. The clouds were thick, the rocks wet and dark. It was subtle, almost like a mirage, but wrong. The shimmer moved slightly, not with the wind, not like a heat haze. It kind of drifted, shifting as if it knew I was looking at it. I blinked a few times, convinced my eyes were playing tricks. I waved my hand in front of it. The shimmer didn't distort in the usual way. It sort of pulled back, almost like it was avoiding my hand. My first thought was some weird reflection, maybe water vapor or a trick of the clouds against the rocks. But it didn't make sense. The air was cold, too cold for any heat shimmer, and there was no moisture in that exact spot. I started walking again, slow, cautious, trying to see if it stayed put. And it did, only it wasn't static. As I moved, the shimmer moved too, not in a straight line, but almost lazily. It was gliding in the air just above the forest floor. It wasn't fast, but it wasn't random either. I told myself I was imagining things, that my brain was bored or tired. I was tired. I'd gotten up at 5 a.m. for the drive. But the feeling in my chest was that sort of tight unease you get when something doesn't add up. Something that's watching but not doing anything. I took a deep breath and picked up my pace, trying to shake it off. About 20 minutes later, I reached a clearing. There was a fallen log I sometimes stop at for a snack, and I sat down. I kept glancing back the way I came, half expecting to see a deer or a hiker. That's when I noticed it again. The shimmer just beyond the edge of the clearing. This time it was closer, but I swear it hadn't moved any faster than I had. It just anticipated me, like it knew I would stop. I felt my stomach twist. I had my phone out, planning to check the GPS and maybe take a picture, but I hesitated. Every time I raised the phone, the shimmer seemed to distort, like it was aware of the lens. I lowered it. That was enough to make my hands tremble. I didn't want to panic, didn't want to feed into whatever this was, but it was getting harder to pretend it was normal. I ate a granola bar in silence, trying to convince myself it was just my imagination. When I looked up, the shimmer was gone. I scanned the surrounding forest, slow, careful. No movement, nothing but the usual pines, ferns, and rocks. My heartbeat slowed a little. Maybe it really was nothing. I packed up and continued. The trail started to slope downward, and I felt safer, more like myself. But then it happened again. This time I caught a glimpse out of the corner of my eye, a distortion in the air, low to the ground, moving along the side of the trail like a shadow with no edges. I froze. My boots made no sound on the wet leaves as I shifted my weight back. The shimmer stopped when I stopped. I tried to rationalize. A reflection of sunlight? No, still overcast. A trick of my eyes? Maybe, but I'd never hallucinated something this persistent. Animals? There were no animals that could move like that, so smoothly, so aware. And the forest was too quiet for any of the usual sounds to explain it. I forced myself to keep walking. Every time I turned a corner, it was gone, only to reappear further down the trail as if it had followed me. And it wasn't consistent with the wind. Leaves around it rustled normally, unaffected, but the air inside the shimmer was still. There was a faint distortion, almost like a heat wave in reverse. Nothing around it blurred except the shimmer itself. After what felt like forever, I reached a section where the trail ran along a ridge. From there, I could see a valley below, mist clinging to the treetops. I paused, letting myself breathe and enjoy the view, and that's when I noticed something else. The trail behind me looked different. Not physically different, no, it was the light. Everything had a strange wash to it, a faint silver shimmer that hadn't been there before. And then I realized my watch was a few minutes off. I swear I had checked it 10 minutes ago, but somehow 15 minutes had passed. I felt my stomach tighten again. I didn't see the shimmer for a while after that, just the normal forest. But the feeling persisted, the sense of being watched, of something moving in tandem with me. I started walking faster, talking to myself out loud to break the tension. Just a weird reflection. You're fine. Nothing here. By the time I got back to the trailhead, it was late afternoon. The sun had started to break through the clouds, and the air felt warmer. My truck was exactly where I'd left it. I locked the doors, got in, and started the engine. For the first few minutes, I told myself it was over. Then, as I pulled onto the road, I caught a glimpse in the rearview mirror. a shimmer in the distance on a slope parallel to the road. It moved, slowly, deliberately, and then vanished. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, and looked again. Nothing. I drove home in silence, the kind of silence that presses against your ears. When I got inside, I made a cup of tea and sat by the window, looking out at the yard. I wanted to tell someone anything, but I couldn't. My story would sound insane. That night, I kept thinking about the shimmer. It wasn't an animal. It wasn't a reflection. It moved with awareness. It followed, almost, but not aggressively, not like it wanted to harm me. And the weirdest part? There were moments where I could swear it paused, as if waiting for me to catch up. I didn't go back to Pine Ridge for a long time. When I did, I took a different trail, one I knew was crowded on weekends. And even then, I couldn't shake the feeling that the forest remembered me, that the shimmer had marked the path somehow. I've tried explaining it to myself rationally. Temperature inversions, light diffraction, heat shimmer in cold air. Nothing fits perfectly. And sometimes late at night, I'll remember that trail, that shimmer moving just a few feet ahead, aware of me, and I'll wonder if it's still there, somewhere, just waiting. I never saw it again, not in the daylight, not at night. But I can't shake the way the air seemed alive and how it always knew where I was. It happened last November on my way back from visiting my sister in Missoula. I left later than I should have, around 9, thinking I could make it home before midnight if I didn't stop. The drive usually takes about 2.5 hours, all mountain passes and long empty stretches where the radio turns to static. It had just started to snow when I got onto Highway 200, that fine, dry kind that looks like dust in the headlights. The temperature had dropped fast, and the roads were empty. I had the heater running low and my phone playing a podcast through the Bluetooth, but I remember turning the volume down because I kept thinking I heard something, faint noises behind the hum of the tires. It wasn't music or voices, more like short electrical pops. I assumed it was interference. The snow kept getting heavier the further I drove. The sky was dark but clear between the flurries, and every so often the clouds opened up and I could see stars. The road wound between tall pine trees that bent in over the guardrails, the kind of landscape that looks endless at night. I was maybe 30 miles from home when the lights in the car dimmed. Not all at once, they faded slowly, like someone was turning a dial. The dash lights went dull, the radio screen flickered, and the interior lights above my head glowed faintly before dying. The headlights stayed on, but they seemed weaker too, like the beams were being swallowed by the snow. I glanced at the battery light, but nothing had come on. Everything still worked, the engine, the heat, even the Bluetooth, just quieter somehow. For a few seconds, I thought it might be my alternator going bad, but then I noticed the silence. I didn't realize until that moment how much background noise there usually is when you drive. The fan, the tires, the low hum of the road. It all seemed muted, like I was underwater. Then the sky flashed. It wasn't lightning. There were no clouds for that. It was just one clean pulse of white light, bright enough to turn the snow silver and cast hard shadows through the trees. I actually ducked like an idiot, thinking maybe a power line had blown above me or something exploded in the distance. The light vanished as quickly as it came, but in that one instant, I saw the road ahead. And that's when I noticed the shapes. They were on both sides of the road, spaced evenly along the tree line as far as my headlights reached. Tall, narrow figures, maybe a dozen on each side. They weren't moving. They weren't trees either. I could see the trunks of the pines behind them. These were thinner, straighter, more like silhouettes than bodies. I remember gripping the steering wheel so tight my hands hurt. I didn't stop. I didn't even slow down. My first thought was that I was seeing shadows from the light flash, like an afterimage. But they stayed there, motionless, all the way down that stretch of road. When I passed the first one, I could tell it was maybe 7 or 8 feet tall, completely black, like it absorbed the headlights instead of reflecting them. I couldn't make out arms or faces, just long vertical forms that almost looked cut out of the air. I kept driving. The further I went, the more I started to convince myself they were just some weird trick of perspective. Maybe fence posts or young trees without branches. But there was a pattern to them that didn't fit. They stood the same distance apart, perfectly aligned, every 20 feet or so. After about 30 seconds, I passed the last one. The road curved left, and suddenly, they were gone. The car's interior lights flickered back on right after that. Not gradually this time. They just snapped to life, bright and normal. The heater picked up again. The noise of the tires came back. It was like someone had flipped a switch. I drove the rest of the way home without stopping, trying to tell myself I'd imagined it. When I got into town, I pulled into the gas station on Main just to calm down and check my car. Everything seemed fine. I popped the hood, checked the battery terminals, all tight, no corrosion. I even turned the lights off and on a few times. Perfectly normal. I went inside for a coffee, and the woman at the counter, Carla, said I looked pale. I told her I thought I saw something weird on the road, and she laughed and said people see all kinds of things on that stretch late at night. Elk, moose, even a few black bears that wander too close to the shoulder. I didn't tell her what I'd actually seen. When I got home, it was close to midnight. My dog didn't come to the door like she usually does. She was in the hallway, whining at the back window that faces the woods. I looked outside, but there was nothing, just dark trees and falling snow. I couldn't sleep. Around 2 a.m., I went back to the kitchen for water, and that's when I heard the same faint electrical popping sound again, like short bursts of static. It was coming from the direction of the car. I stepped outside and listened. It was quiet except for the snow hitting the porch. Then I heard it again. 3 sharp pops in quick succession, then silence. The air felt charged, like right before a storm. My phone screen glitched when I tried to turn on the flashlight, freezing for a second before the light came on. I walked to the driveway, checked the car. No lights, no movement, nothing unusual. I went back inside. The next morning, everything looked normal. The snow had stopped, the sky was bright, and the road in front of the house was clear. But when I went to start the car, it hesitated. The engine cranked slowly before catching, like the battery had drained a little overnight. I didn't think much of it until I checked the dash camera I'd installed last summer. It runs on a loop and saves footage from each trip automatically. When I plugged it into my laptop, the file from that night was corrupted. It played fine up until the timestamp that matched when the interior lights dimmed. Then the screen went black for about 20 seconds. No sound, no picture. When it came back on, I was already past the curve, after the shapes had disappeared. The weird part is that the blackout section wasn't actually missing from the video. The file length was continuous, like something had just recorded pure black the entire time. I tried brightening the frames, adjusting contrast, nothing. Just empty black. A week later, I drove that same stretch again during the day. I stopped at roughly the same spot, looking for anything that could explain what I saw. Fence posts, markers, new saplings, whatever. There was nothing. The trees grew close to the road, unevenly spaced, no clearings or lines that could match the pattern I remembered. It's not a part of the road I like driving anymore. Even in daylight, it feels too still, like sound doesn't carry right there. The air feels heavier somehow. The dash cams worked fine ever since. No power problems, no flickering lights. But sometimes, if I'm driving alone at night and the radio crackles for no reason, I still find myself glancing at the tree line, half expecting to see those same shapes standing there again, perfectly still, waiting for another flash of light. I woke up to this weird hum, like static. Not loud, just a faint electrical buzz that didn't sound like anything in my apartment normally makes. It took me a second to realize the whole room was lit up. Every screen, my laptop, TV, alarm clock, tablet, everything that could glow was glowing. All of them were just blank white screens. I sat up, still half asleep, thinking maybe the power had flickered or my smart plugs glitched. But it wasn't just that they were on. The light was too bright, almost clinical, like hospital lighting. My eyes watered. I reached over and tried to unplug the lamp first, but it didn't turn off. Nothing did. The air felt charged, like the moment before a thunderstorm, that tingling heaviness that makes the tiny hairs on your arms stand up. I reached for my phone on the nightstand, and as soon as I picked it up, the screen shifted from white to black. Then a message appeared in plain, centered text. Look up, no notification sound, no app open, just those words. I froze. I thought maybe it was a prank, like some malware or remote control thing, but my phone was on airplane mode. I always sleep with it that way. I remember holding it for a second, waiting for something else to happen, but nothing did. The room was completely silent, except for that faint hum, like static somewhere deep in the walls. I did look up eventually. The ceiling looked normal at first, just then I noticed this glow. Not bright, not coming from any one place, but a sort of diffuse light spreading over the ceiling. Like the white from the screens was reflecting upward, but it wasn't. The angle didn't make sense. It was coming from above, through the ceiling somehow, like a hidden light source bleeding through the plaster. I sat there staring, trying to make sense of it, until I realized all my electronics were flickering slightly now, just subtle pulses of brightness, in sync with the hum. Every time the light dimmed, the hum got quieter. Every time it brightened, the hum rose again. I remember saying out loud, "What the hell is happening?" just to hear my own voice. It sounded small in the room. The message on my phone disappeared. Then it came back again. Same words. "Look up." At that point, I actually laughed. One of those nervous, stupid laughs that come out when you're scared and trying not to be. I got out of bed and walked to the window. Outside was completely still. The streetlights were out. No headlights, no movement. Just a flat, pale glow over everything, like the moon behind fog. Except there was no fog, and the sky wasn't the right color. It was more silver gray, almost metallic. I cracked the window open. The air outside was colder than it should have been for June. No crickets, no traffic, nothing. Just that hum again, but louder now, like it was coming from the sky itself. I leaned out a little and looked up. There was something there. Not a light exactly, more like a distortion. A section of the sky that looked bent, like heat rising off asphalt, except it wasn't shimmering randomly. It held its shape. A wide, circular patch, maybe 100 feet across, just wrong. Like the stars around it were being pulled slightly toward the center. I blinked hard, thinking maybe my eyes were playing tricks from the screen glare, but when I looked again, it was still there. I couldn't see edges, but I could feel them. The air underneath it looked compressed somehow, like the atmosphere itself was bending inward. The hum deepened, not louder, lower, like a vibration under my ribs. I felt it before I heard it. And then, as if on cue, every light in my apartment shut off at once. Total darkness. I dropped my phone, and the sound of it hitting the floor was weirdly muffled, like the air had gone thick. I stood still, listening. My eyes adjusted a little, and I could still make out the glow through the window, faint but steady. I crouched, found my phone by touch, and when I picked it up again, it was dead. No light, no response. That's when I noticed the other sounds in the building. Doors creaking, slow footsteps above me. I live on the top floor. There's no apartment above mine. I stared up at the ceiling again, and I swear I could see faint shadows moving behind the plaster. Not shapes exactly, just darker areas that shifted slowly, rhythmically, like something pacing. I tried to convince myself it was headlights from outside, but there were no cars, no lights at all. The hum rose again, and then everything went silent. Not quieter, silent. I couldn't even hear myself breathe. For a few seconds, it was like sound itself had been switched off. My ears felt clogged, like I'd gone underwater. Then, one short, sharp crack. A flash of light through the ceiling, just for a split second. Everything came back at once. The hum, the brightness, the screens. My TV turned on by itself, full volume static. I jumped back and nearly fell over the bed. And over the static, for maybe half a second, I thought I heard something. Like a whisper buried inside the noise. It wasn't words, not in any language I know. More like a rhythm, almost patterned. It stopped before I could process it. The light on the ceiling started to fade then, slowly. My electronics one by one shut off again, but this time it was more gradual, like the power was draining naturally. The hum got softer until it was gone. I stayed awake until dawn. I didn't sleep, just sat in the chair by the window, staring outside. When the sun finally came up, everything looked normal. The sky was blue, the birds were back, the streetlights were on schedule. My phone still wouldn't turn on until I plugged it in around 8 a.m. The battery had been at 64% before bed, but it was completely drained. When it finally booted up, the first thing that popped up was a calendar reminder I didn't make. It said, "Check window tonight." No time, no repeat setting, just that. I deleted it immediately. I called my friend Marcus later that day, told him I thought my wiring might be messed up. He came by in the afternoon with his multimeter, checked the outlets, the breakers, everything. No surges, no weird readings. He said the voltage was perfectly normal. I didn't tell him about the message or what I saw outside. That night, I left every device unplugged, even the alarm clock. I lay in bed in total darkness, waiting, not sure for what. Around 2 in the morning, my phone, on the nightstand, completely off, buzzed once. Just a short vibration. I grabbed it, and the screen flashed white for less than a second before going black again. No notifications, no log of it ever happening. I kept the light on after that. A few days later, Marcus texted me asking if I'd been messing with his phone somehow. He said his alarm had gone off the previous night with no set time, and when he looked at the screen, it said, "Look up." He swore he didn't type it, and I hadn't touched his phone since he came by. I didn't answer him. I just turned my phone off again and put it in a drawer. It's been a couple of weeks now. Everything's been normal since then, mostly. But every once in a while, when I'm walking home after dark, I get that same feeling, like the air is humming just a little too quietly and the streetlights dim in sync with it. I try not to look up anymore. I was driving home from Portland to my parents' place in the Coast Range. It was late, probably close to 1 a.m., and the rain had been light all evening, just enough to make the asphalt slick and the windshield wipers sound like a dull rhythm. I had the heater on, fog creeping across the inside of the windows, and the highway practically to myself. Somewhere around the 26-mile marker, I noticed a pair of red taillights in the distance. Pretty normal for a late-night drive, except the lights were steady, no brake flickers or turning signals, just a constant small dot of red far ahead. I shrugged it off, thinking it was someone driving the speed limit, keeping their distance. I followed for a while, not close, just passing the miles in silence, the taillights staying maybe half a mile ahead. The road curved through the hills, and every time I thought I was catching up, they were still there, perfectly placed on the black ribbon of asphalt. There weren't any side streets that far out, just the highway cutting through the forested hills, and no towns for at least 20 minutes in either direction. After maybe 20 minutes, I started to notice little things. The lights didn't behave like a normal car. Sometimes they'd slow down a little, like they were pausing, then accelerate again without reason. I'd swear I'd see them drift slightly off the lane, but when I looked closer, it was just that. Some small, unexplainable motion, like they weren't bound to the road the way a car should be. I told myself it was a semi-truck, some old car bouncing over bumps, anything to make it normal. But then the weather got weirder. The rain picked up, sheets of water slapping against the windshield, but the area right in front of the lights stayed perfectly clear, as if the rain didn't reach them. I wiped the windshield and even sprayed the fluid, and it still stayed exactly the same. Clear, steady red dots against the dark road. After maybe half an hour, I realized the highway markers were passing faster than they should have, compared to the lights. I checked my speedometer around 55, cruising carefully on wet asphalt, and the lights weren't far ahead anymore. But then, just as I was thinking I was catching up, the taillights lifted. Not in a curve, not gradually, they just started rising straight up. I blinked, thinking maybe I'd hit a patch of fog or my eyes were playing tricks. I slowed down, almost stopped, and watched. The lights rose slowly at first, then faster, straight into the sky. No noise, no reflection from clouds, just red dots ascending into the darkness above the tree line. I kept driving, staring up, gripping the wheel, my headlights cutting through the wet road. The rain was heavier now, but there was no splash, no change in the falling water under the lights. After a few seconds, the lights were gone. Just black sky and the sound of rain. I drove on, confused and shaking. I kept looking over my shoulder at the stretch of road I had just passed, half expecting the lights to drop back down. Nothing. I tried to convince myself I'd misread everything. Maybe it was a plane taking off or a power line reflection. But the angle was all wrong. The motion impossible, and the way the rain stayed clear around the lights, there was no explanation I could come up with. I called my brother, Matt, later that morning. I hesitated before telling him, but I wanted someone to hear it. I told him about the taillights, how they didn't follow the road, how they lifted into the sky. He laughed at first, said I was imagining things or the road was just messing with me. But when I said how the rain didn't touch them, he got quiet for a second. "No way," he said finally. "You're not just imagining the rain part." I drove the rest of the way home in silence, checking my mirrors obsessively. The fog in the windshield made everything worse. Every glint of light in the trees made me tense, but nothing else appeared. Just the sound of wipers, the hum of tires on wet asphalt, and the occasional distant rumble of thunder. When I pulled into my parents' driveway, I sat in the car for a minute, breathing, staring at the dark trees beyond the lawn. The rest of the night passed normally, but I kept imagining red dots in the sky, hovering, rising endlessly. I tried going back to sleep, but the ceiling above me felt too dark, the shadows stretching differently than usual. The next day, I checked the local news, thinking maybe someone reported a weird plane, a helicopter, anything. Nothing. Even the weather report didn't mention unusual conditions, just rain and fog. A week later, I drove that highway again, this time in daylight. The road was empty, green hills on both sides, nothing to indicate the previous night. But the spot where I'd seen the lights rise felt different. I slowed to take it in, scanning the treetops. No marks, no scorch, no landing area. Just the road, slick from recent rain, and forest stretching into the distance. I've driven that highway a few times since, always at night, always careful. And I can't tell you why. But I watch the sky constantly now, checking the tree line, the horizon. The memory of those lights, the way they rose, the way they moved without regard for gravity or the road, sticks with me. Sometimes I wonder if I imagined part of it, if my brain filled in gaps in the darkness. But the feeling isn't imagination. The way my chest tightened when they lifted, the way the air seemed heavier, like the storm itself was bending around those lights. It wasn't just a dream. And I keep thinking about what would have happened if I'd tried to follow them higher, into the sky, instead of just watching. But I never did, and I never will. The red dots are still out there somewhere in my memory, rising straight up, carrying something I can't name. I was at my uncle's cabin in northern Minnesota when it happened. It was late July, humid and heavy, the kind of air that clings to your skin. The cabin sits on the edge of a lake called Vermilion Bay. Not big, but wide enough that when storms roll in, you can see them building miles away. That evening, I'd been sitting on the back deck with a beer, watching the clouds gather over the water. My uncle was in town for the night, so it was just me and his dog, Bear. It was one of those calm before the storm evenings. No wind, no waves, just the deep rumble of thunder way off in the distance. The air smelled metallic, like rain was already falling somewhere far off. I remember noticing how the light changed before the storm hit. The lake went this dull greenish gray, and the tree line across the water turned almost black. The first flash of lightning lit up the clouds from underneath, and I could tell the storm was huge, layered, tall, almost glowing in places where the sun still hit the top of it. I was mesmerized. Bear started pacing by the railing. He's normally lazy, but then he was restless. His ears twitched at every rumble. I figured maybe he sensed the pressure drop or heard thunder closer than I did. I reached down to scratch his head, but he just stared out toward the lake, eyes fixed on something I couldn't see. I turned my chair to face the storm again. The thunder got closer, sharper. A few fat drops of rain hit the deck, leaving dark spots on the wood. I thought about going inside, but I wanted to see the lightning hit the water. I've always found that strangely beautiful. Then it happened. A flash. So bright, it turned the entire lake white for a split second. I blinked hard, spots dancing in my vision, but in that fraction of a second, I saw something I couldn't explain. Above the storm, far higher than the clouds, there was a shape. Not light, not smoke, just a solid shadow, darker than anything else in the sky. Perfectly circular. It looked enormous, spanning across what had to be miles, and it wasn't stationary. It shifted slightly, not drifting like a cloud, but with a subtle precision, like it had control. Then it was gone. I just sat there, frozen. I remember whispering, "What the hell was that?" out loud. Bear was growling softly now, the sound low and steady. His hackles were up, and he was staring straight at the sky. I scanned the clouds, waiting for the next flash. When lightning struck again a few seconds later, I saw it again. Same spot, same perfect circle. Only now the edge of it glowed faintly, a dim rim of light outlining the darkness. It hovered there, absolutely still. My brain tried to make it something logical. A trick of light, maybe the underside of a weird cloud formation, but I'd never seen anything that geometrically perfect in nature. The thunder from that strike hit hard, shaking the deck under my feet. Bear whimpered and backed toward the door. I followed him inside, shut the sliding glass door, and turned off the lights so I could still see out. The rain started coming down hard, hammering the deck, but I could still make out the flashes through the glass. Every time the lightning hit, I looked for it. And every time, it was there. That huge black circle, faintly outlined, hovering right above the storm. Then, something stranger happened. The thunder started sounding delayed. Normally, you see the flash, then count a few seconds before hearing the boom, right? But the next few flashes didn't line up with the sound at all. I'd see lightning, then hear the thunder immediately after, like it was right above me. Then another flash would come, but the thunder would lag by almost 10 seconds. The rhythm was all wrong. Bear started barking then, short, sharp barks directed at the ceiling. I tried calming him down, but he wouldn't even look at me. Just barked and growled like something was right above us. The rain eased up after maybe 20 minutes, and I cracked the door to listen. The air felt strange, thin, like it was missing that usual damp smell after a storm. The night was too quiet. Even the frogs and crickets were silent. Then, a flash lit up the clouds again, and I saw something that made my stomach drop. The shadow, the circular shape, it wasn't over the storm anymore. It was lower, much lower. It looked like it was pressing down on the clouds now, distorting them. The edge was so well defined that it couldn't be a natural formation. The way it blocked the lightning made it look solid. I remember stepping onto the deck again, barefoot, the boards slick with rain. The air buzzed faintly, that static feeling you get near power lines, but stronger. The hair on my arms lifted. The water on the lake was completely still, even though the storm should have stirred it up. The reflection of the clouds was visible, but the circular shape wasn't. It didn't reflect at all. It was like the water refused to show it. Then there was a flash of white light, not lightning this time. It came from inside the circle, not bright enough to blind me, but bright enough that it lit the entire sky around it. And it didn't fade instantly. It pulsed once, then dimmed, like something powering down. I stumbled back toward the door, heart pounding, grabbed Bear by the collar and pulled him inside. The dog was shaking, actually trembling. I turned off every light and sat on the couch by the window, staring out through the glass. The rain had stopped completely. No wind, just silence. For almost half an hour, I watched that shape hang there. It didn't move, didn't flicker. Occasionally, it would light up from within, faintly, like distant lightning inside the clouds, but always in that perfect circle. At some point, I realized I wasn't hearing thunder anymore, just that soft buzzing in the air. Then, without any flash or sound, it was gone. 1 second it was there, the next it wasn't. The clouds didn't move to cover it. It just vanished, leaving only the faintest glow behind the storm before everything went dark again. I sat there a long time, not sure what to do. Eventually, the normal sounds started coming back. Crickets, wind through the trees, waves hitting the dock. The world just sort of resumed. When I finally went to bed, I noticed the power had cut out at some point. My phone was dead too, even though it had been plugged in. The next morning, everything worked fine again, except the radio. It only picked up static until around noon, when it suddenly came back on like nothing happened. I didn't mention it to anyone right away. When my uncle got back later that afternoon, I told him a storm rolled through, but left it at that. I thought maybe I'd imagined the shape, that it was some trick of perspective or my eyes adjusting to the lightning, but I couldn't shake how perfectly round it was. Clouds don't do that. A week later, I went back home to Duluth. A few nights after that, I got a text from my uncle. He said he'd been outside at the cabin around midnight, letting Bear out, and saw flashes of light over the lake again. He asked if the storms had been bad when I was there because, according to him, they hadn't had thunder this late in the season before. I didn't answer right away. I just stared at the message, then out my apartment window, half expecting to see that same faint outline in the clouds. I haven't gone back to the cabin since. The train rattled along the tracks like it always did, the wheels clanging against the rails in that steady, hypnotic rhythm. I'd taken the night train from Albany to Syracuse a few times before, but this ride was different. Late March, freezing rain outside, the kind of wet, sharp cold that seeps through the seams of a coat. I had a window seat in the last car, alone, the aisle empty for the most part. Most people slept or stared out the window at the dark blur of trees and fields. I was halfway through a thermos of coffee, leaning back with my headphones on when it happened. 1 second, the world outside was black, streaked with rain and the reflection of the interior lights on the glass. The next, it was white, just completely, blindingly white. Not snow, not fog. It was like someone had dropped a sheet of pure light over the countryside. I sat up, heart thumping, and the train's interior didn't change. The fluorescent lights hummed the same, the other passengers still slumped over or asleep. I looked around the car. Everyone was completely oblivious, even the conductor down the aisle. I rubbed my eyes and blinked. The whiteness outside didn't move. It wasn't clouds or mist drifting. It stayed still, stretching for miles in both directions. I tried to see shapes, trees, fields, buildings, anything, but there was nothing. Just this uniform, glowing expanse. I tapped the window, half expecting the glass to distort the light somehow. Nothing. My reflection stared back at me, a pale face under the hood of my jacket. Then the train slowed ever so slightly, like it had hit a curve or a signal. I looked for the conductor and asked quietly, "Excuse me, what's going on outside? Are we delayed?" He paused, frowning. "No, sir. Everything's on schedule. No reports of any delays. Track's clear." He glanced down at the console and shrugged. "Just normal winter weather, I guess. Some patches of fog, maybe." Fog? That didn't make sense. I tried to describe it, but the words sounded ridiculous even as I spoke them. "It's white. Completely white. I can't see anything." He laughed softly, the kind of dismissive chuckle someone gives when a passenger is confused about a heavy rainstorm. "You're seeing reflections or light from the overheads. Happens sometimes at night with wet windows. Nothing to worry about." I swallowed, unsure if I should insist. Part of me wanted to go along with him. Part of me wanted to get up and look out at the other side, but the car was silent and still. Nobody else reacted. I leaned back against the seat, trying to keep it in perspective. Maybe it was some kind of lighting effect from the nearby town lights reflecting off the wet fields. But no, this whiteness didn't flicker. It didn't fade. It didn't change at all. I started trying to track the horizon. The train was moving, right? I should have seen movement, trees passing by, dark patches of land, streetlights, but the whiteness stayed flat and consistent. It wasn't just bright, it was uniform, almost physically smooth, like a blank canvas. I took out my phone, trying to take a photo. The screen lit up, camera app ready, but when I pointed it at the window, all I got was static. White fuzz, shifting slightly, but giving no detail. I tried again, same thing, no photo. I even tried recording video, switching the lens, closing the brightness, nothing. The phone didn't malfunction otherwise. It could take selfies, browse the internet, just the view outside. I tried to focus on the edges of the light. Was it clouds? Was there a light fog bank? But there was nothing to mark the horizon. No trees, no fences, no power lines. The whiteness stretched from the bottom of the window to the top and across the entire span. After a few minutes, I felt uneasy. The train slowed again, almost imperceptibly. The rhythmic rattle of the rails felt louder now, more insistent. I glanced around. Everyone else slept or stared off into nothing, unaware. I considered going to the next car. Maybe someone there had noticed it. But as I started to get up, the light shifted slightly. Not dramatically, but it drifted closer, like a fog creeping toward the train. My stomach tightened. I froze, half expecting someone to notice it behind me. Nobody did. I sat back down, trying to think rationally. I pressed my forehead to the window and whispered, "Okay, what is this?" The light didn't answer, obviously, but I swear it changed then. Not in brightness, not in size, but in weight. It felt like it pressed against me, like the air around the train had a denser quality, heavier, almost warm. I pulled my jacket tighter around me. A shadow flickered across the whiteness for a second. I thought maybe it was a cloud, a branch, a distant barn, but it was just a vague line, smooth and geometric, like the edge of something not quite natural. Then it vanished. I tried talking to the conductor again, lower this time. Are you sure the tracks are clear? Anything unusual? He glanced back at me like I was panicking. Clear as far as I can tell. All signals green. No reports from dispatch. We're on schedule. You should rest. It's a long ride. I wanted to leave the car, get someone to check the windows outside, but every instinct in me said to stay seated. Minutes passed. The train kept moving, but the light never faded. Eventually, I started timing it in my head. Maybe 15, 20 minutes? I didn't have a clock in the car, just the soft glow of the cabin lights. But when I finally looked at my phone, it read 1:12 a.m., the same as when I first noticed it. Not minutes later, not hours, just frozen. I tried speaking again, this time narrating everything I saw into my phone's voice recorder. White light, no shapes, still moving, drifting slowly, passengers asleep, conductor swears nothing unusual. When I played it back later, the recording was fine. My voice sounded normal, no other sounds. Then, gradually, the light started fading. Not dimming, not slowly melting. It just disappeared, like someone pulled a curtain. I leaned against the window, expecting to see trees, fields, maybe a farmhouse or a barn. Nothing. Total darkness. Just the usual black streak of the night outside. I rubbed my eyes, looked at the other passengers, still asleep. The conductor looked at me once more, curious, then turned back to the controls. I asked him one last time when we stopped at Syracuse, trying to see if anyone else had reported anything. He shook his head. Nothing out of the ordinary, sir. Smooth ride, on time, nothing unusual recorded. I left the train that night feeling disoriented. The streets were wet, faintly reflecting the sparse streetlights, and the air smelled of rain and diesel. I walked to my car, replaying every moment. The whiteness, the drifting shadows, the way the air had felt heavier. Weeks later, I checked the railroad logs. There was nothing. Not a note, not a delay, not an anomaly of any kind. I've ridden that line again since, at night and in the day. Nothing like that ever happened again. But sometimes, when the wind is damp and the sky low, I swear I can remember the way the air felt pressed against the windows of that train car, and I can see that whiteness stretching endlessly outside, smooth, bright, and impossibly still. I was driving through western Kansas late last spring, heading toward Colorado to visit my brother. I took back roads most of the way, long stretches of empty highway and farmland where you can go miles without seeing another car. It was one of those overcast evenings where the sky looks heavy and low, like it could rain but never quite does. The air was thick and the smell of wet soil carried through the vents. I had the windows cracked and the radio on low, just some local AM station fading in and out. About half an hour west of Great Bend, I noticed this soft, steady clicking sound coming through the speakers. It wasn't part of the broadcast, no music or static, just a rhythmic tick, 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 perfectly even, like a metronome. At first, I thought it was interference or a bad connection. I adjusted the tuner, but no matter where I set it, the clicking stayed. It wasn't loud, just constant. It had a kind of pattern to it, like two short clicks followed by one long one, repeating. I turned the volume all the way down, but the sound didn't stop. I thought maybe it was the engine, so I shut off the AC, rolled up the windows, and listened closely. It was definitely coming from the radio. I switched stations again, same thing. Even when the screen showed static, the clicking was still there. It wasn't totally unnerving at first, just odd. I kept driving, figuring it'd fade out once I got farther down the road, but it didn't. It stayed with me mile after mile, same steady rhythm. Around then, I passed a sign for a small town called Lorain. It's basically a few houses and a gas station, surrounded by flat farmland. I hadn't seen another car for 20 minutes, so I slowed down a little, trying to figure out what the radio was picking up. The sound wasn't mechanical, not like relay switches or a bad spark. It almost sounded intentional. When I drove under a set of power lines, the clicking sped up for just a second, then slowed again once I passed. I thought that was strange, but I tried to rationalize it. Maybe interference from the electrical lines or something with the car's antenna. I drove another few miles, and that's when I noticed the fields. There were cows on both sides of the road, hundreds of them, spread out across the pasture land. But every single one of them was facing the same direction, north. Perfectly aligned, none grazing, none moving, just standing still, all turned the same way. That's when I pulled over. The clicking stopped instantly. Not faded. Stopped. Like someone had flipped a switch. The silence hit me hard. No wind, no insects, no distant hum of highway noise. Even the air felt heavy, like it was holding its breath. I sat there with my hand on the key, waiting to hear the clicking start up again. Nothing. I looked out at the field closest to the road. The cows were maybe 50 yards away. A whole herd of them, frozen mid-graze, all staring in the same direction. Their ears didn't flick, their tails didn't move. Just a black and white line facing north. I turned the radio back on. Static. No clicking. I switched through every frequency, all the way up and down. Still nothing. I got out of the car. The smell of rain and manure hung in the air, but everything else felt wrong. The air was colder than before, noticeably colder. I walked to the edge of the ditch and stared out at the field. The cows were completely still. I could see their sides rising and falling as they breathed, but none of them turned their heads toward me. I shouted something, just a quick "hey," to see if they'd react. Not a single one moved. When I got back in the car and started the engine, the radio came alive again. The clicking returned, same rhythm, same volume. I sat there listening for maybe a full minute, trying to convince myself it was just interference. But then the clicking changed. The rhythm slowed, then paused, then started again, this time in shorter bursts, like it was responding to something. I turned the volume knob all the way down again, but the clicking didn't fade with it. It stayed exactly the same. Something about that made my stomach turn. I decided to get moving. As soon as I pulled back onto the road, the clicking sped up slightly, like it was matching the car's acceleration. I kept driving west, watching the fields on either side. More cows, same thing. Every single one of them facing north. After maybe 10 minutes, I noticed lights in the distance, orange and faint, maybe a half mile ahead. At first, I thought it was a combine working late or a truck parked on the shoulder. But as I got closer, I realized it wasn't moving. The light was just hanging there above the field, not blinking, not flickering, just steady. The radio clicking slowed again. I rolled the window down. The air outside was dead quiet, no insects, no wind. The light was too bright to be a lantern, too dim to be headlights. It looked suspended, like it wasn't attached to anything. I slowed down but didn't stop this time. I passed within a few hundred feet of it, and it didn't move. Just hung there, about 20 feet above the ground, glowing orange like sodium light through fog. As I passed, the radio let out a sharp burst of static, loud enough to make me jump, then cut to total silence. No clicking, no sound at all. I drove another mile before I looked in the rearview mirror. The light was still there, same position, same brightness. I pulled over again, mostly because I didn't know what else to do. The second I stopped, the radio came back, clicking again, same slow rhythm. I looked at the fields on both sides. The cows this time were facing toward the road, every one of them. I don't know why, but that detail broke me. My skin went cold, and I got this overwhelming urge to leave. Not curiosity, just a deep sense that I shouldn't be there anymore. I hit the gas and didn't stop for 40 miles, not until I reached a small truck stop near Russell. I parked under the bright canopy lights and sat there, engine running. The clicking was gone. The radio worked fine. I turned it to a talk station and left it there, just to hear normal human voices again. When I went inside to grab coffee, I asked the cashier, a woman maybe in her 60s, if she'd ever heard weird radio interference out there. She looked at me kind of funny and said, sometimes the reception's bad near the wind farms, but that was about it. When I came back out, I could smell rain in the air again. I looked up. Clouds were thick and low. Just as I was about to get back in the car, a flicker of orange light flashed faintly across the fields to the east. Not lightning, just one soft pulse, like someone had switched on a light bulb behind a curtain and then off again. I drove straight through the rest of the night into Colorado. The radio never made another sound. 2 days later, my brother and I were driving back along that same stretch during the day. Clear skies, bright sun. We passed the same farmland, same herds. The cows were scattered randomly this time, grazing, moving normally. Nothing strange about them at all. I didn't mention it. But when we stopped for gas near the same area, I noticed something. On the hood of my car, thin streaks of dried residue, like faint gray dust. Not dirt, not pollen. When I brushed at it, it left a metallic smell on my fingers, like rust or burned wiring. That night, when I got back to my brother's place, I turned on the radio again out of habit. No clicking, no interference, just clean static between stations. But sometimes when I'm driving through flat country and hit a stretch with no cell signal, I still catch myself listening for that sound, the soft, steady tick, tick, tick underneath the noise. I was driving back to Asheville from a client meeting in Boone. It was around 10 at night, maybe a little later. I'd left later than I planned, and by the time I hit the stretch of 221 that winds through the mountains, there wasn't another car in sight. It had been raining off and on all evening, that misty kind of mountain rain that hangs in the air, and the pavement was still slick from it. My wipers were on low, and I had the defrost going just to keep the windshield from fogging up. That road's quiet even during the day, but at night it feels completely deserted. No streetlights, just the occasional reflector nailed to a post. The trees close in on both sides, and the turns are sharp enough that you can't see more than a few hundred feet ahead at a time. I was maybe 20 minutes south of Linville Falls when I saw the parked car. It was pulled over on a gravel turnout, half off the road, headlights off, no hazards. At first, I thought someone had broken down. I slowed a bit as I came around the curve because you don't see many cars stopped up there that late. As my headlights swept across the turnout, I saw two people standing next to the car. They were both on the passenger side, facing the tree line, not the road. One was taller, maybe a man, and the other shorter, possibly a woman, though it was hard to tell through the haze and rain. They weren't moving, just standing side by side, looking into the woods. The car looked like an older model sedan, maybe dark blue or gray, and there was something strange about the way it sat. The angle of it didn't look right, like it wasn't fully on level ground. My first thought was maybe they'd pulled over to deal with a flat tire, but then why stand facing the woods? I slowed to maybe 30, keeping my eyes on them as I got closer. Neither turned or reacted to my headlights at all, not even a glance. Most people instinctively look when a car is coming toward them on a dark road, but they stayed completely still. As I passed, my headlights flickered. Just once, but everything went black for a full second. My heart jumped because that road is pitch black without them. Then, as suddenly as they went out, they came back on. The dashboard lights, the radio, everything had stayed on fine. Just the headlights had cut. When the beams came back, the turnout was empty. The car, the two people, gone. I mean, completely gone. I hit the brakes hard, tires skidding a bit on the wet road. My first thought was that I'd somehow passed the wrong spot, but I could still see the gravel shoulder where the car had been. It was maybe 30 feet back. Nothing was there now. I sat in the middle of the road for a second, trying to make sense of it. There hadn't been any sound. No engine starting, no door slam, nothing. Just gone. I threw it in reverse, backed up a bit, and stopped opposite the turnout. My high beams caught nothing but wet gravel, trees, and fog. I remember rolling the window down a little, listening. It was dead quiet except for the rain dripping from the trees. I don't know how long I sat there, maybe a minute. My stomach felt tight, and I couldn't decide whether to get out or just keep driving. Finally, I pulled forward again and drove slowly past. I looked for tire tracks or footprints, anything. But the rain had already softened the gravel enough that I couldn't see much. It struck me that the car hadn't been running when I saw it. No exhaust, no light, no interior glow. The rest of the drive home felt strange. I kept catching myself, checking the mirrors every few seconds. Every shadow looked like headlights coming around a bend. My radio cut out a few times. Not static, just dead silence for a few beats, then came back like nothing happened. When I got to Marion, I stopped for gas, even though I didn't really need it. I think I just wanted to see another person. There was a woman behind the counter, middle-aged, friendly enough. I asked her if there had been any accidents up the mountain that night. She said not that she'd heard. I didn't explain why I was asking. I got back on the highway and reached home around midnight. My hands were still trembling a little when I parked. The next morning, I called my coworker John, who lives up near Linville. I told him about what I saw. Not the part about the car vanishing, just that I'd passed one pulled over with people standing by it. He said he hadn't heard about any trouble on that stretch, but he'd keep an eye out. That bugged me, though. If the car had broken down, somebody should have reported it, or it would have still been there by morning. So that afternoon, I drove back up there. The weather was clear this time. Bright sunlight, no fog. I found the same turnout easily. It's the only one on that bend. There was nothing there but gravel and a few tire marks that could have been from anyone. I walked a little way into the trees where the two people had been facing. The ground was soft from the rain, and I saw what looked like faint impressions. Not really footprints, just disturbances in the leaves and mud, but they didn't lead anywhere. What caught my attention was a strip of broken branches about shoulder height, maybe 10 feet into the woods. It looked like something wide had passed through, bending them downward. Not a car, obviously, more like if a strong gust had blown through, except it hadn't been windy at all the night before. I went maybe 20 yards in before I decided I'd had enough. The woods were too quiet. Even in daylight, it felt heavy, like the air itself was thicker. A week went by, and I tried to stop thinking about it. I didn't tell anyone else. It sounded too weird when I replayed it in my head. Two people, facing the woods, lights flicker, then nothing. A couple of nights later, I was sitting in my driveway about to head inside when I noticed my headlights dim slightly, just for a split second, like a brownout. The engine didn't falter. It was subtle enough that I almost convinced myself I imagined it, but the timing of it brought everything back. I started avoiding that route after dark. If I had to drive through, I'd do it during the day. The few times I've gone since, I keep my eyes on the road, trying not to even glance at that turnout. But it's impossible not to. There's this urge to look, like my brain's checking if something's there again. One time, months later, I did see another car pulled over in the exact same spot. A white pickup this time. Middle of the afternoon, clear weather. Nobody standing beside it, but something about it made me slow down anyway. As I passed, I noticed the driver's door was open, and a man was sitting inside, staring at the trees. Not moving, not turning his head, just staring straight ahead into the woods like he didn't even notice me. I thought about pulling over and asking if he was okay, but I didn't. I just kept driving. I've told myself a dozen times there's probably a normal explanation. Some trick of the fog, a reflection, headlights malfunctioning. Maybe the two people were just hikers who left right as my lights flickered. But I've replayed the timing over and over, and there wasn't enough time for anyone to move a car, much less disappear into the woods without a sound. I still don't understand what I saw that night. All I know is that every time I drive a mountain road now and see a parked car on the shoulder, I slow down just a little. Not to help, not to look closer, but to make sure it doesn't vanish when my lights hit it. It was a little after 2 in the morning when I hit the fog. I was driving for a courier service out of Tacoma, heading south on I-5 with a van full of office equipment that needed to be dropped in Portland by sunrise. The stretch near the Columbia River gets foggy this time of year, but that night it was heavier than I'd ever seen. The bridge lights disappeared before I even reached the midpoint. I slowed down to about 30, hands tight on the wheel. The headlights barely touched the fog. It was like driving inside a cloud. The road ahead glowed faintly white, and beyond that, nothing. My wipers were on even though there wasn't any rain. I remember thinking how quiet it was, no cars ahead, none behind, just the low hum of the tires on the concrete. A minute or two in, I noticed a faint glow above me. At first, I figured it was the reflection of my own headlights bouncing off the fog, but then it shifted. I looked up through the windshield and saw several lights, 6 or 7 of them, arranged in a loose arc, gliding silently overhead. They weren't bright like airplane lights, more like a soft bluish-white, steady, not blinking. I rolled down the window to listen. Nothing. No rotor sound, no engines, just the faint hiss of fog moving past the van. I leaned forward, squinting up through the windshield. The lights moved together, too slow for a plane, and they didn't seem to be attached to anything I could see. They floated across the fog like they were part of it. I couldn't tell how high they were, maybe 100 feet, maybe 1,000. The fog made it impossible to judge distance. Then I realized the lights were matching my speed. I tested it. I eased off the gas down to 25. The lights slowed too, keeping the same distance overhead. When I sped up again, they followed. I don't know why, but I didn't feel scared yet. It was more like confusion. I'd seen weird stuff on night drives before, optical illusions, reflections, but this didn't feel like that. It felt deliberate. After about a minute of watching them, one of the lights drifted slightly out of formation, moving to the side, then back again. The others adjusted like they were tethered together somehow. I could see their glow reflected faintly in the fog around them, but never any outline or structure. I was halfway across the bridge by then. The fog was so dense, I couldn't even see the railings. My GPS lost signal. The phone screen flickered and went black for a second before restarting. The radio crackled with a burst of static, even though it had been off. I muttered something like, "What the hell is going on?" and gripped the wheel tighter. The lights suddenly rose higher, not fast, but steady, until they vanished completely into the fog. The glow faded, leaving me alone again in the thick white void. I kept driving, waiting for them to reappear, but they didn't. Just me, the fog, and the low hum of the van. When I came out on the other side of the bridge, the air cleared almost instantly. It was like breaking through a curtain. The fog just stopped. I remember blinking against the sudden brightness of the highway lamps. Everything looked normal again. But then I saw the cars. There were maybe 4 of them spaced out along the shoulder, hazard lights flashing. A couple of drivers were standing outside, looking confused. I slowed down and pulled over a few car lengths ahead of them. One guy waved me down, a middle-aged man in a windbreaker, eyes wide. He came up to my window and said, "Did you see it too?" I didn't answer right away. "See what?" I asked, though I already knew what he meant. "The lights," he said. "Over the bridge." I nodded once. "Yeah." He motioned toward the other cars. Everyone stopped around the same time. We thought there was an accident ahead, but then the lights just disappeared. I looked past him at the others. One woman was on her phone, pacing. Another guy was leaning against his car, looking up at the sky like he expected the lights to come back. I got out of the van. The air smelled damp and cold. I asked the guy what time he had, just trying to make small talk or maybe ground myself a little. He looked down at his watch. 2:27. That didn't sound right. I'd checked my phone before the fog, and it had been 2:09. The drive across the bridge should have taken maybe 3 or 4 minutes. I pulled my phone out. It read 2:14. I walked to the nearest car, a silver Honda with its hazard lights still blinking. The dash clock inside said 2:43. The woman who'd been pacing came over and said hers showed 2:19. Every car clock we checked was different. Someone joked weakly about how weird that was, but no one laughed. It wasn't funny. It was wrong in a way that didn't make sense. One of the guys said he'd lost GPS for a while in the fog, too. His phone had rebooted, just like mine. The woman said her music had cut out mid-song and wouldn't start again until she was off the bridge. We all just stood there for a few minutes, not really knowing what to do. The sky was perfectly clear above us, stars visible again, no trace of fog or light. Traffic started to pick up. Just a few cars at first, then more. Eventually, everyone drifted back to their vehicles. I sat in the van for a while before pulling back onto the road. I checked my dashboard clock again. It said 2:30. By the time I got to the delivery warehouse in Portland, the clock on my phone said 3:56, but the one in the van said 4:10. My route log, which automatically tracks time, had a blank gap between 2:11 and 2:28. I asked the dispatcher if the system ever glitched like that. He said no, not usually. The van's clock reset itself the next day when I turned it on, back to 12. The GPS worked fine, and there was no sign of any malfunction. I talked to Emily, the woman with the Honda, a few days later. She said her mechanic checked her car and couldn't find anything wrong either. The dashboard clock still ran 17 minutes fast, though. She said she thought about leaving it that way. I took the same route a week later, around the same time. No fog, no lights, just a quiet, empty bridge. I drove slower than usual, half expecting the radio to pop or the GPS to fail again, but nothing happened. Every now and then, when I drive through fog, I find myself watching the sky instead of the road. Not really expecting anything, just watching. It's strange how something can happen in less than a minute and still make the world feel slightly off, afterward, like a picture hung just a little crooked. It was around 11 when I turned off Route 16 and started up the narrow road that led to my little place in the White Mountains. I worked late that night at the kitchen, line cook, overnight prep, and I was tired in that specific, stubborn way where your hands feel heavy, but your mind is oddly sharp. The stretch up to the cabin is one I'd driven a bunch of times. Tight switchbacks, low stone walls in a few places, trees that close in so the road feels like a tunnel. I'd done it in winter and summer, in fog and when the air was clear, so I knew to keep it slow and expect anything. Right from the first bend, something felt off. The night was clear, cold and thin, but there was this smell in the air that I didn't expect, like wet metal or an old battery. It hit me when I rolled down the window for a second to clear the cigarette smoke from the car. I remember thinking, that's odd. No storms, no power lines nearby. I shrugged it off and kept climbing. A mile or so in, the radio started to act up. It was on a low, familiar classic rock station, and then it dipped into static for a beat, came back, and then briefly played a different show, news in a voice that didn't fit the station, before snapping back to the song. The dial didn't move. My phone, sitting in the cup holder, popped to no signal for a second and then nailed full bars again. Little glitches, I told myself. Old car, older head unit. It's the kind of thing that feels creepy at 2 in the morning, but has a practical explanation if you're tired enough to want one. Further up, the trees closed around the road and the canopy swallowed the moonlight. The headlights made these little rectangles on the asphalt and cut off at the edge of the trees. The road does a run of 3 quick S-bends there. You have to be careful, especially with deer. I took it slow, down to maybe 25, engine low, just enough so I could feel the line of the road through the wheel. On the second S, I noticed a small white light sitting in the distance along the edge of the road, about the same distance ahead of me as the next bend. At first I thought it was a reflector or one of those little safety markers you sometimes get on guardrails. But as I approached, it didn't change size or angle the way a reflector would. It held steady, a clean, small point of white, like a tiny headlight, but too precise to be that. I slowed more because that's what you do. My head swung left and right before the bend, and the light kept the same place in front of me. It wasn't moving relative to the road. If anything, it seemed to be mirroring the curve just ahead, always the same distance from my bumper. Maybe I got a little smug, like I'd chased down whatever it was by bringing my speed down. Like a lot of late-night drivers, I'm aware my imagination fills gaps. Still, the steadiness bothered me. When I was barely a car length from it, I realized whatever I was seeing was not more than a few feet off the pavement. That up-close detail made it weirder. It didn't really cast a glow on the road the way my headlights did. No broad beam, just a bright dot, very white. I've driven in places where people have flashlights on the side of the road, or where reflective stickers catch your eye, but this thing had a kind of presence to it. Not alive, quiet, but like it had intentions, like it was waiting for me to catch up. Around the bend, the road narrowed, and I had to steer gently. My tires made that small, steady whisper on wet leaves. I checked my mirrors out of habit, and the light was still there, keeping pace, perfectly aligned. I eased the car to a stop at the next pullout. Habit again, a safety check. The white light stopped at the same time. I sat there for a minute, the engine ticking as it cooled, and thought about just backing up and driving past. Instead, I watched the light. It didn't flicker, it didn't pulse. It simply hung there, a white point, as if someone had pinned a star to the road. There were other small things I noticed while I sat. The night noise was thinner than usual. Where I'd normally hear a steady chorus of frogs or the occasional owl, there was this flatness to the soundscape, like someone had turned down the volume on the woods. My phone buzzed in my pocket, a text from the kitchen asking if I was on my way, but when I looked, the screen was blank, then woke up with the message like nothing had happened. The cabin's LED clock, I thought for a second, flashed forward a minute and then righted itself. Little displacements, not alarming by themselves, but enough to make the night feel hinged. After maybe 3 minutes, I put it back in gear and eased back onto the road. The white light fell into step instantly, holding the same distance ahead like a metronome. For the next 20 minutes, it did this: curve, hold, straight, hold, left, right, hold. It never drew closer, never fell back. When another car approached from the opposite direction, its beams slid past us, and the driver blinked once and moved on. No change in the white dot's behavior. Once I passed a small turnout where a pair of fishermen had their truck pulled over, their campfire low. They looked up as I drove by, but didn't react to the light. It was like the thing existed in a narrow lane of perception that didn't touch everyone. At one point, on a long, sweeping right-hander, a deer stepped out on the opposite shoulder and froze mid-stride. Usually deer bolt, or at least stare and then move. This one stood and watched. Its ears were forward, body still. It felt wrong the way it watched the light. Then it eased back into the trees like it had been told to step aside. I know that sounds strange, but that's exactly how it felt, like a gentle command. I tried talking to it out loud at one point, nothing meaningful, meant more to break the tension. "Okay, what are you?" My voice was swallowed by the car interior. No response. The light held its place like a patient animal, clean and indifferent. Around the last major switchback before the ridge, I hit full darkness. No moon through the canopy, and my headlights reflected back with a damp sheen from the leaves. The dot again kept the same distance, framing the edge of the next turn the way I would. I found myself trusting it more than I wanted to admit, because it was doing a job I do for myself when I'm drowsy, keeping my pace even, keeping me from overshooting curves. Halfway up that switchback, my foot found the brake out of habit, and the car slowed to a stop. The white light stopped too, just ahead on the curve. I killed the engine to listen, another of those stupid human impulses, caught by the stillness, and for the first time since the day started, all that breathing I'd been doing felt loud. My ears popped slightly as if the air pressure changed, even though the road was level there. I opened the door because I couldn't stand the sitting there anymore, that small, ridiculous need to verify. Cold air hit me in a way that made the hairs on my forearm prickle. The light was maybe 20 feet ahead, small and exact, and when I stepped down onto the pavement, it seemed to hold its place, maybe even tilt slightly away like a shy animal would. I walked the distance in 3 long steps and then slowed, because whatever this was, up close it didn't resolve into anything I could name. It didn't have edges. It was more a point of precision, like the tip of a laser. No heat, no hum, no ripple on the air. I crouched like a kid because I wanted to be very small and careful. I swept my hand out to touch where it had hung, and my fingers met only night air and cold stone. Nothing. I made a small laugh that felt thin in the darkness, and the sound vanished up into the trees. When I stood up, the light was gone. Not dimmed, not shifted, just gone. I looked down the road and up into the canopy where moonlight leaked through the leaves, and there was nothing. The world looked ordinary, perhaps even a little mundane, like the moment itself had sighed and returned to routine. I walked back to the Subaru and sat down slowly. My hands were damp. I restarted the car, and this time the radio hummed steady, no glitches. My phone had full bars, and the text from the kitchen sat there like a marker. You okay?" I thumbed back. "Yeah, running late," and told myself the whole thing was a trick of battery, a reflection, a thing I could explain if I tried. The drive up the final pitch to the cabin felt like walking back into the living room after someone's called out your name. You know you're safe, but you're jittery. I parked, shut the engine off, and sat for a while in the dark, listening to the normal creaks of the place settling. The next morning, I walked the stretch of road in daylight. There was nothing. No footprints, no scorch, no marker where I'd stood. The leaves were dry and whole. People at the deli later that day told me the owls had been surprisingly quiet that night, but that could be coincidence. I never figured out what the light was. I haven't told a lot of folks because most of them would just say I was too tired after a late shift or that I should lay off coffee. Maybe they're right. Maybe I misread a headlight reflection or a hand held on the shoulder. I don't like the idea of that being the whole story, though. I can't explain the steadiness, how it matched every curve without lag, and I can't explain the way the natural sounds thinned around it or why the deer froze and didn't bolt. I don't know why it vanished when I got out, as if it respected the boundary between standing on pavement and stepping into somebody else's night. I still take that road, but now I slow more than I used to, keep my eyes forward and my hands on the wheel. Every so often, I glance a little past the next bend and wait for that small white point to be there like a friend or a sign. Mostly, there's nothing. Mostly the night is just the night. But sometimes, when a cloud shifts and leaves a patch of sky bright as a coin, my eyes catch a place on the road where the light could be. And I think about stepping out. I don't usually. I drive on, and the light, wherever it goes, keeps whatever it's doing to itself. I was driving back from Ridgecrest late one night, around 11:30, heading east toward Barstow. There's this stretch of desert highway between Trona and the 395 that I've always hated. Just miles of flat nothingness. The kind of road where the only thing keeping you company is the sound of the tires on cracked asphalt. I had the windows down because the air conditioner in my old Tacoma barely worked, and even though it was late, the air still had that baked desert smell, like hot dust and dry weeds. I hadn't seen another car for at least half an hour. The radio was cutting in and out, just static mostly. I didn't even have cell service out there, which wasn't unusual. You lose signal the second you pass the salt flats. I was mostly zoned out, headlights catching little bits of tumbleweed and patches of loose sand blowing across the road. Then I noticed something weird about the stars. I always use them as a sort of mental clock on those drives. When you're that far out, away from town lights, the sky is bright with them, layers on layers, like someone spilled salt across black glass. But I looked up and realized there were fewer than before. At first, I thought a cloud was rolling in, which made no sense because the forecast was clear and there wasn't even a hint of haze earlier. But the stars weren't fading like they do with clouds. They were vanishing in neat, gradual rows from west to east, like someone was pulling a huge invisible curtain across the sky. I slowed down without realizing it. The truck coasted to maybe 40. The night air felt different, thicker somehow. I leaned forward over the steering wheel and squinted, trying to see what could be blocking that much sky, but there was nothing to see. No outline, no shadow, no texture. Just absence. Row by row, the stars went out. The weird part was how clean it looked. No gradient, no blur. Each line of stars just blinked out, perfectly straight, like something massive and perfectly flat was moving over me, slowly enough that I could track its edge by how the stars disappeared behind it. There was no sound at first. Then I noticed the quiet. Not silence, but that kind of muffled pressure that makes your ears feel clogged. The wind through the open window had died. Even the truck's engine seemed quieter, like it was being swallowed by distance. My gut told me to pull over. I eased the truck onto the shoulder, gravel crunching, and shut off the engine. The desert swallowed the noise almost instantly. I stepped out. The ground was still warm under my boots. The air smelled dry and faintly metallic, which didn't make sense. Above me, the dark gap where the stars had been was spreading, wide enough now that I could tell it wasn't cloud cover. It was darker than the sky around it, a kind of black that didn't reflect anything, not even the faint glow from my headlights. I turned the headlights off, too. That was when I really saw it. It was big, impossibly big, and moving so slowly it barely looked like motion at all. The gap stretched across maybe half the sky now, and I realized I couldn't see where it ended in either direction. It wasn't blocking light so much as erasing it. The desert in front of me, the horizon line, even the dim starlight on the rocks. Everything just fell away into this silent darkness that kept advancing. I remember standing there waiting for some kind of noise, an engine, wind, anything. But it was like the world was holding its breath. Then came a low vibration. Not a sound exactly, more like a feeling deep in my chest, like standing near a huge generator. My keys rattled faintly in my pocket. The truck's antenna started humming, just barely, like it was catching some invisible signal. The hair on my arms rose up. I backed up toward the truck, eyes still on the sky. The dark shape above had reached directly overhead, blotting out everything except a few rows of stars along the far edge of the horizon. There was this faint shimmer near the leading edge. Not lights exactly, but a distortion, like heat haze, except it was cold out now. I could feel it on my skin, the temperature dropping fast. Then, suddenly, all the power in the truck went out. No headlights, no dash lights, nothing. My phone screen went dark too, even though I hadn't touched it. I got back into the cab and tried the ignition. Dead. Not even a click. I tried again. Same thing. I reached for the flashlight I keep in the glove box. Nothing. The batteries were fine earlier that day. The only thing left was the faint sound of gravel shifting under the tires, even though I wasn't moving. I thought it was the wind, but there was no wind. It was this tiny crackling noise, almost electrical, like static running through sand. I looked up again and realized the stars on the other side of the sky were starting to reappear. Line by line, the darkness was moving away, or maybe passing over entirely. It wasn't until it cleared the patch above me that I saw how sharp the edges were. It wasn't rounded like a cloud, it was angular, geometric. Not perfectly straight, but close, with little dips and ridges like some massive, uneven plate sliding through the atmosphere. As it kept drifting east, I saw something even stranger, faint glimmers of light within it. Not steady or symmetrical, more like dim reflections, as if something metallic deep inside was catching light that shouldn't exist. The glow was soft and colorless, like reflections off brushed steel. And then, just like that, the sound came back. The air pressure released. My ears popped. The wind returned in a slow sweep that smelled like dust and sagebrush. My truck's dome light flicked on by itself, and the dash lights followed all at once. The headlights blinked on without me touching the switch. The radio, which had been silent for nearly 10 minutes, came back mid-song, but slower, like the track was dragging through molasses. I turned the key again. The engine started like nothing had happened. I sat there for a while, just letting the truck idle. I didn't move until I could see the last of the shape fade beyond the far hills. The stars came back perfectly, crisp and still. Everything looked normal again. When I finally started driving, I noticed the clock on the dash read 12:11. That made sense, except when I checked my phone later, it said 12:23. I didn't think much of it until I remembered looking at the clock when I first pulled over. It had read 11:46. I should have been there maybe 5-10 minutes tops, not nearly 40. The rest of the drive was quiet. No static, no more vanishing stars, just that strange, tight feeling in my chest like the air hadn't fully returned to normal. When I reached Barstow, I pulled into a gas station and went inside to grab a drink. The cashier, a guy about my age, looked at me funny. He said I had sand in my hair. I brushed it off and he said, "No, it's like glitter or something." I went to the bathroom to check. Under the fluorescent light, there were tiny flecks on my jacket and around my collar. Not glitter exactly, but tiny metallic specks that shimmered dull silver. When I tried to wipe them off, they just smeared, leaving faint gray streaks on my skin. I washed them away as best I could, but they left this faint metallic smell on my hands that soap didn't cut. By the time I got home, I'd convinced myself it was dust from the road. Maybe residue from the air vent or some weird mineral in the wind. But the next morning when I went to start the truck, I noticed a thin film of the same gray dust on the hood and windshield. Only in the middle. A perfect rectangle, about the size of a car door, as if something had rested there overnight. There were no footprints, no handprints, just that faint, metallic smell again when I touched it. It was gone by afternoon. I drove that same route again a few weeks later. The stars stayed put, the radio worked fine, everything was normal. But sometimes when I hit that same stretch of desert at night, I get that weird feeling again, like the air's waiting for something. And without thinking, I glance up at the sky to make sure the stars are still there. It was just after midnight when I left work that night. I'd stayed late to close up the small accounting office where I worked in Petaluma. It was mid-October, clear and cool, and the air had that damp chill that hangs around near the coast. The drive home to Sebastopol usually took about 20 minutes if the roads were empty, and that night they were. I remember thinking how dark it felt. No moon, no wind, just the sound of my tires and the hum of the old Honda. I took the back roads like I always did, cutting through the open farmland instead of sticking to the highway. It's faster that way and usually peaceful. There aren't many streetlights out there, so the stars were bright, or they should have been. For the first few miles, I could barely see them. I thought maybe the humidity had made the air hazy. About 5 minutes outside of town, I noticed three white lights above the field to my left. They were spaced perfectly apart and forming a triangle. I assumed it was a plane at first. The Sonoma County Airport isn't far. But the lights weren't flashing. They were steady, soft white, not bright like landing lights. I slowed a little, leaning forward over the steering wheel. The lights weren't moving like a plane either. They were just gliding, completely silent. The shape didn't turn or tilt. It just kept the same orientation, moving parallel to the road like it was pacing me. I rolled down my window to listen, expecting the distant hum of engines. Nothing. Just the faint sound of crickets and the wind rushing past the car. For maybe 30 seconds, I told myself it was a drone. A big one, maybe some kind of survey equipment. But the lights were too far apart for that, easily wider than a small plane's wingspan. And the way it moved didn't look mechanical. It was smooth in a way that made my stomach tighten. I slowed down to about 30, keeping my eyes on it. The triangle held perfectly steady above the field, maybe 100 feet up. No blinking lights, no change in color, no sound. Then it turned, not like a plane banking or a helicopter pivoting. The whole shape rotated in place, flat, so the point that had been leading suddenly shifted 90 degrees. The lights stayed in perfect formation the whole time. It was like watching a compass needle rotate, slow and deliberate. I don't know why, but I pulled over. I think I wanted to see it without the motion of the car. I stopped by the side of the road and turned off the engine. The night went dead quiet. No frogs, no insects, no wind. I could hear my own breathing. The lights stopped rotating and hovered there. I sat for a second, just staring, then reached for my phone. The screen glared too bright in the dark, and by the time I got the camera app open, the lights had started to move again. This time, they tilted backward, like the whole shape was angling upward. I hit record and aimed the phone out the driver's side window, trying to keep the lights in frame. They tilted higher, slower, and then, without warning, shot straight up. Not fast like a rocket, but impossibly smooth. No acceleration, no sound. 1 second they were there, the next they were higher, smaller, and then gone. The stars behind them looked normal again, like nothing had been there. I just sat there for a while, the phone still recording the empty sky. My heart was pounding, and I felt that weird tightness in my chest that comes from holding your breath too long. I didn't even realize until later that the recording didn't save. The app crashed, and when I reopened it, the last clip was from earlier that afternoon. I started the car again and got back on the road. For the next mile or so, I kept looking up through the windshield, half expecting the lights to come back. The radio, which had been off, suddenly turned on by itself, static, no station. I reached to turn it off, but before I touched the knob, the static faded into silence again. The road dipped into a grove of eucalyptus trees, and when I came out the other side, my dashboard clock read 12:58. It had been 12:32 when I pulled over. I don't remember sitting that long. I hadn't even turned the car off for more than a minute or two, I was sure of it. I checked my phone clock, it said 12:40. That mismatch sat in my head the rest of the drive home. I told myself the car clock must have been wrong. Maybe it reset when the radio glitched. But I'd looked at it before leaving work, and it was right then. When I got home, I parked in the driveway and just sat there for a while with the lights off. My street was quiet. A few porch lights on, one cat crossing the road. I stepped out of the car and looked up at the sky again. Everything looked normal. Stars, faint glow from town in the distance. No noise, no movement. I checked the car clock again before going inside. 1:03. My phone said 12:46. I didn't tell anyone right away. The next morning I went to work like usual, but the memory of it sat in my head like something unfinished. When I got home that night, I checked the dash clock again. It was still 17 minutes fast. I asked my coworker, Jared, if he'd ever seen strange lights around that area. He said sometimes you see helicopters from the Coast Guard or private planes coming in low, but I didn't mention how the lights moved. Later that week, I drove that same stretch again. Same time, same road, nothing. Just stars and the dark shape of fields. No fog, no clouds. I even parked in the same place for a few minutes, but it was silent and empty. I tried not to think about it too much after that, but sometimes I catch myself replaying how the lights moved. The rotation, the tilt, the way they lifted. It didn't look like flight. It looked like something changing direction in a way it shouldn't be able to. The clock in my car never went back to normal. I eventually had the battery replaced, and that fixed it, but before that, it kept that exact 17-minute difference. One night, a couple weeks later, I was driving home from dinner around the same time, and I saw a plane passing overhead. Just a normal small aircraft with blinking red and white lights. It should have looked ordinary, but watching it made me tense up. For a second, I thought it was slowing down midair like before, but it wasn't. It was just my eyes waiting for something that wasn't going to happen. That's the thing that stayed with me the most. Not fear exactly, but that feeling of waiting. Like part of me expects to see those three lights again every time I look up at the sky. My wife Emily and I were driving through the Mojave around midnight, heading east toward Needles after spending the day in Barstow. We'd planned to stop for the night, but traffic had been light, and I figured I could make the rest of the drive before I got too tired. It was one of those clear desert nights where everything looks frozen in place. No wind, no movement, just stars and empty road. We'd been talking about nothing important. Plans for the weekend, her sister's new job, when the radio made this sharp popping sound. Then came static, not the kind that fades in and out with bad reception, but this harsh, pulsing static that filled the car like white noise. I reached down and tried switching stations, but the dial moved on its own. The display flickered through frequencies, never landing on one long enough to hear anything. "Maybe we're losing signal," Emily said, though her voice sounded uncertain. I turned the radio off. The static kept going. It took me a second to realize the sound wasn't coming from the speakers anymore. It was deeper, like it was part of the car itself. Almost like the air around us was humming. I killed the ignition, and for half a second everything went silent. Then the static came back, louder. We looked at each other. I started the car again, thinking maybe it was some weird electrical glitch. The dashboard lights flickered. The clock on the radio display flashed 12:47, then 12:07, then blanked out completely. The headlights dimmed for a moment, but the engine sounded fine. I checked my phone. It was dead. Emily's too. Both had been charged earlier that evening. There was no cell service out there, but they wouldn't both die like that. "Let's just keep going," I said. "It's probably interference or something." She nodded, but I could tell she was nervous. Her hands were tight in her lap, watching the empty road ahead. We passed a faded sign for Goffs, still about 20 miles off. The desert stretched out on both sides, low hills in the distance, nothing but sand and scrub. The static finally cut out, and the sudden quiet made my ears ring. For a minute, I felt relief, until the radio display blinked again and came back on by itself. It started cycling through AM stations this time, landing on half-formed voices, snippets of talk that would cut off mid-word. I caught one clear phrase, something like, "ahead of time," before it scrambled into noise again. I switched it off for good. That's when we noticed the clock. It read 1:04. I stared at it, confused. "Didn't it say 12:40 something before?" Emily frowned. "Yeah, I think so." I pulled out my phone just to check the time, but it was still dead. Hers too. We hadn't been stopped that long, maybe a minute, 2 at most, when I'd turned the car off. The idea that the clock had jumped ahead 17 minutes didn't make any sense. We drove in silence for a while after that. The highway was so empty it felt unreal, just the headlights carving a tunnel through the darkness. No other cars, no lights from houses or gas stations. A few miles later, Emily pointed out the window. "What's that?" At first I didn't see it. Then I noticed a faint glow off to the right, above the horizon. Not white like headlights or yellow like a distant house light, more of a pale blue, shifting slightly like heat shimmer. It stayed there as we drove, always the same distance away. I slowed down to around 50, trying to make sense of it. There were no roads that way, no towns. The glow pulsed once, bright enough to throw a thin line of reflection across the windshield, then faded back to its usual faint shimmer. "Could it be a plane?" Emily asked. "Not moving like one," I said. It was just there, perfectly still. We kept watching it, waiting for it to change, but it didn't. Eventually it dimmed so much that we could barely tell if it was still there or if our eyes were just adjusting to the dark. Then, just as quietly as it had appeared, it went out completely. A few minutes after that, the static returned. It wasn't as loud this time, but it came in these slow, rhythmic bursts, like breathing through a broken speaker. I felt something tighten in my chest every time it flared up. I checked the clock again, still 1:04. I tapped the face of it, wondering if it had frozen. Emily leaned forward, staring at the dashboard. Is the speedometer moving? I looked. The needle was stuck at 0. We were clearly moving, doing about 50, but every gauge on the panel was frozen. The odometer light went dim, then out. The headlights started to flicker, just slightly, but enough to make the shadows on the road jump. I gripped the wheel tighter and pressed the gas. The car responded fine, but everything else looked wrong, like the power was draining, yet the engine kept going. After maybe 2 more miles, the static started breaking apart into fragments of what sounded like voices again. The first few were too garbled to make out, but then one came through, low, like a whisper, close to the microphone. It wasn't English, or if it was, the words were distorted beyond recognition. Emily turned the radio off again, but the noise didn't stop. That's when I realized it wasn't coming from the speakers anymore. It was coming from everywhere, the dashboard, the vents, even the metal of the car. Then everything cut out at once. The static, the lights, the engine, dead silent. We coasted to a stop in the middle of the highway, surrounded by darkness so complete I couldn't see the edge of the road. I tried the ignition. Nothing. Emily reached over and grabbed my arm. Don't get out, she said. I didn't plan to. We sat there, listening. There was nothing at first, just the sound of our own breathing. Then, far off, I heard this faint, low vibration. Not a hum exactly, more like the pressure you feel when a big truck passes close by, except there was no truck. It grew stronger for a few seconds, then faded. The car clock blinked once, then came back on. 1:21. The headlights flicked on by themselves. The engine turned over like it had never stopped. Every gauge jumped back to life. My phone buzzed in the cup holder, rebooting. We just stared at each other. Let's get out of here, Emily said, barely above a whisper. I didn't argue. I pressed the gas and the car moved normally. Everything looked fine. The radio was off, the lights steady, the clock running like it should. The only strange thing left was this faint smell inside the car. Something metallic, almost like ozone after lightning. We didn't talk much the rest of the drive. We got into Needles around 2:10, pulled into a small motel, and sat in the parking lot for a while before going in. My phone showed 1:53 when we parked, but the clock in the car said 2:10. When I checked the trip distance the next morning, it didn't match what it should have been. We'd lost about 10 miles somewhere between Goffs and Needles, though we hadn't taken any turns or detours. The car's fine now, so are the phones. But sometimes when we drive at night and I catch a flicker of static on the radio, I still feel that same tightness in my chest. I don't know what happened out there. All I know is that something did. I left the office later than I meant to that night, around 10:30, and the drive home on Route 47 through the countryside of central Illinois was supposed to be routine. An hour of empty 2-lane highway and some straight gravel roads once you leave the town limits. It had been one of those heavy, humid summer nights, the kind where the air sticks to your skin and the windows fog if you roll them up too fast. The moon was out, bright behind a thin layer of clouds, casting just enough light to make the cornfields on either side of the road shimmer faintly. I remember hitting a stretch where the road narrows and dips between 2 slight rises in the land, a place I've driven hundreds of times. That's when I first noticed a low hum in the air. Not a car, not a plane, something deeper, vibrating, almost physical, like the sound was resonating through the asphalt into the tires. I glanced up and saw the moonlight disappear. It wasn't cloudy, at least not in a patchy way. It was like a shadow had moved directly over it. I slowed instinctively, foot easing off the accelerator. The hum got louder, the kind of vibration that makes the windshield rattle just slightly, the car's frame itself thrumming in sync. I squinted, trying to make sense of it, and that's when I saw it. It was a dark mass, impossibly low, gliding silently over the fields. I couldn't make out a shape, not really, just a shadow against the clouds. The corn below didn't move, the trees didn't sway, but the air seemed thicker somehow, heavier, and that vibration stayed constant as it passed overhead. My heart was racing, but my instincts told me to stay in the car and keep driving. The mass moved past, and the hum faded, leaving the night almost unnaturally quiet. I exhaled slowly and tried to convince myself it was some kind of aircraft I'd never noticed. Military helicopters sometimes flew this route at night, but they make noise, and this didn't. Not a single rotor, no afterburner, nothing. Just that deep vibration and the dark shape blotting the moon. I kept driving, but something felt off. The road didn't look the same. I passed the old railroad crossing, but it didn't line up with the mile marker I expected. My GPS chimed, which I found reassuring, except the next turn it suggested didn't exist. I laughed nervously. Right, I muttered to myself, the road doesn't exist. I glanced down at the screen. It insisted I turn around, retracing the last 5 miles I'd already driven. I hesitated, wondering if the GPS had glitched. The satellite signal looked fine. Still, every time I tried to continue forward, the app recalculated, saying the road ahead was inaccessible, missing, or private property. I glanced at the fields on either side. Empty. Nothing but corn and dirt tracks. By this point, my hands were gripping the steering wheel too tightly. I slowed to 20 miles per hour and looked behind me in the mirror. Nothing. No headlights, no hint that another vehicle had been following, just the empty 2 lanes stretching back toward town. I considered pulling off to the shoulder to collect myself, but the ditch was soft from a recent storm, and I didn't want to risk getting stuck. I kept moving, cautiously, the vibration from before now replaced by a low ringing in my ears. Not loud, but enough to make the silence unbearable. The weirdness didn't stop. As I passed a bend in the road, I thought I saw something moving in the fields to my left. At first, I assumed it was a deer, but the silhouette was wrong. Tall, thin, and upright. It didn't dart or leap like a deer would. It just stood there, half hidden in the corn, watching. I blinked and it was gone. No rustle of leaves, no sound, just nothing. I drove for a long stretch, watching for anything else, anything familiar, anything human. The GPS continued to insist that the road ahead didn't exist, forcing me to loop back, even though in reality I was on a perfectly good asphalt road. The more I tried to ignore it, the more insistently it recalculated. Eventually, I took a deep breath and decided to just follow its directions, looping back the way I'd come. The sky remained dark and quiet. I didn't see the shadow again, at least not clearly, but sometimes out of the corner of my eye, I thought I caught something moving in the tree line, just at the edge of the fields. Every time I looked directly, it vanished. I drove slowly, following the same stretch I had already passed, and the GPS finally stopped recalculating. I pulled off at a small lit gas station just off the highway. The lights felt like a relief. There were a couple of trucks there, idling, the drivers talking quietly. I tried to explain to one of them about the dark mass and the GPS, but he just shrugged. "Must have been a power glitch or something," he said. I nodded, not quite believing him. Back on the highway, I started to feel more normal, though the night air still smelled faintly metallic, like iron or wet metal, and I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I kept glancing in my mirrors, expecting headlights or a shadow, but the road was empty. I drove home cautiously, taking every familiar turn slowly, checking every field I passed. At home, I pulled into the driveway and killed the engine. The silence of the night around my house felt different. Comfortable, ordinary. I stepped inside and checked my GPS again. Signal was fine, everything normal, roads intact and accounted for. I slept poorly that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I imagined that shadow passing over the moon, the vibration resonating through my body. I can't explain what I saw. It was too dark, too low, too solid for a plane, too quiet for a helicopter. And the way my GPS rerouted me, like it was refusing to let me continue, didn't make sense either. The next night, I drove that same route again. The road was normal, the fields were normal, the GPS never blinked. Everything was fine. I didn't see the dark shape, and I didn't hear the low hum. But sometimes when I close my eyes at work or on a quiet evening, I swear I feel that vibration in my chest, like a warning or a pulse from something just out of reach. I don't know what it was, and I haven't tried to look it up. There's nothing like it reported nearby. I tell myself it was a trick of the night, a weird atmospheric effect. But part of me knows that's not enough to explain how solid it felt. how my windshield vibrated in time with it, or why my GPS suddenly decided the road ahead wasn't there at all. I still drive that stretch sometimes late at night, but I keep the radio on low. I watch the clouds and the moon, half expecting something to block it again, and I always keep a hand near the wheel, ready for whatever might be hiding just above the fields, silent and low, out of sight but not entirely gone. I was driving home from Portland to my parents' place in the Coast Range. It was late, probably close to 1 a.m., and the rain had been light all evening, just enough to make the asphalt slick and the windshield wipers sound like a dull rhythm. I had the heater on, fog creeping across the inside of the windows, and the highway practically to myself. Somewhere around the 26-mile marker, I noticed a pair of red taillights in the distance. Pretty normal for a late-night drive, except the lights were steady, no brake flickers or turning signals, just a constant small dot of red far ahead. I shrugged it off, thinking it was someone driving the speed limit, keeping their distance. I followed for a while, not close, just passing the miles in silence, the taillights staying maybe half a mile ahead. The road curved through the hills, and every time I thought I was catching up, they were still there, perfectly placed on the black ribbon of asphalt. There weren't any side streets that far out, just the highway cutting through the forested hills, and no towns for at least 20 minutes in either direction. After maybe 20 minutes, I started to notice little things. The lights didn't behave like a normal car. Sometimes they'd slow down a little, like they were pausing, then accelerate again without reason. I'd swear I'd see them drift slightly off the lane, but when I looked closer, it was just that. Some small, unexplainable motion, like they weren't bound to the road the way a car should be. I told myself it was a semi-truck, some old car bouncing over bumps, anything to make it normal. But then the weather got weirder. The rain picked up, sheets of water slapping against the windshield, but the area right in front of the lights stayed perfectly clear, as if the rain didn't reach them. I wiped the windshield and even sprayed the fluid, and it still stayed exactly the same. Clear, steady red dots against the dark road. After maybe half an hour, I realized the highway markers were passing faster than they should have, compared to the lights. I checked my speedometer, around 55, cruising carefully on wet asphalt, and the lights weren't far ahead anymore. But then, just as I was thinking I was catching up, the taillights lifted. Not in a curve, not gradually, they just started rising straight up. I blinked, thinking maybe I'd hit a patch of fog or my eyes were playing tricks. I slowed down, almost stopped, and watched. The lights rose slowly at first, then faster, straight into the sky. No noise, no reflection from clouds, just red dots ascending into the darkness above the tree line. I kept driving, staring up, gripping the wheel, my headlights cutting through the wet road. The rain was heavier now, but there was no splash, no change in the falling water under the lights. After a few seconds, the lights were gone. Just black sky and the sound of rain. I drove on, confused and shaking. I kept looking over my shoulder at the stretch of road I had just passed, half expecting the lights to drop back down. Nothing. I tried to convince myself I'd misread everything. Maybe it was a plane taking off or a power line reflection. But the angle was all wrong, the motion impossible, and the way the rain stayed clear around the lights, there was no explanation I could come up with. I called my brother, Matt, later that morning. I hesitated before telling him, but I wanted someone to hear it. I told him about the taillights, how they didn't follow the road, how they lifted into the sky. He laughed at first, said I was imagining things or the road was just messing with me. But when I said how the rain didn't touch them, he got quiet for a second. "No way," he said finally. "You're not just imagining the rain part." I drove the rest of the way home in silence, checking my mirrors obsessively. The fog in the windshield made everything worse. Every glint of light in the trees made me tense, but nothing else appeared. Just the sound of wipers, the hum of tires on wet asphalt, and the occasional distant rumble of thunder. When I pulled into my parents' driveway, I sat in the car for a minute, breathing, staring at the dark trees beyond the lawn. The rest of the night passed normally, but I kept imagining red dots in the sky, hovering, rising endlessly. I tried going back to sleep, but the ceiling above me felt too dark, the shadows stretching differently than usual. The next day, I checked the local news, thinking maybe someone reported a weird plane, a helicopter, anything. Nothing. Even the weather report didn't mention unusual conditions, just rain and fog. A week later, I drove that highway again, this time in daylight. The road was empty, green hills on both sides, nothing to indicate the previous night. But the spot where I'd seen the lights rise felt different. I slowed to take it in, scanning the treetops. No marks, no scorch, no landing area. Just the road, slick from recent rain, and forest stretching into the distance. I've driven that highway a few times since, always at night, always careful. And I can't tell you why. But I watch the sky constantly now, checking the tree line, the horizon. The memory of those lights, the way they rose, the way they moved without regard for gravity or the road, sticks with me. Sometimes I wonder if I imagined part of it, if my brain filled in gaps in the darkness. But the feeling isn't imagination. The way my chest tightened when they lifted, the way the air seemed heavier, like the storm itself was bending around those lights. It wasn't just a dream. And I keep thinking about what would have happened if I tried to follow them higher, into the sky, instead of just watching. But I never did, and I never will. The red dots are still out there somewhere in my memory, rising straight up, carrying something I can't name.